Hey guys, we're about to walk into a place where speaking up gets you dismissed. Your footsteps echo like accusations, and every exhale belongs to somebody else. This is life in an Elizabethan manor. Forget the romantic notions of lace collars and candlelit dinners. This is the harsh, rule-obsessed reality beneath the main floors, where keeping quiet isn't just preferred, it's mandatory, like breathing. You've just shown up. Those bags you lugged weren't even your belongings, just the Lord's dirty linens bundled in a grimy cloth. Now you're positioned awkwardly in the staff hallway, wondering if blinking makes too much noise. You haven't had food since sunrise, your shoes are waterlogged from the filth in the courtyard, and your fingertips still burn from clutching that freezing metal handle. Then the first instruction arrives. Keep your mouth shut unless addressed. Nobody yells it, just an older housemaid mumbling as she walks past carrying a pail. But the meaning lands hard. You bob your head too quickly maybe, and whisper a confirmation. Bad choice. She wheels around with a look sharp enough to cut. Did I request a response? Your opening lesson strikes. Even compliance, when spoken aloud, counts as defiance. The quiet here isn't hollow. It has weight. You catch every groan of the floorboards overhead, every tap of the master's boots crossing his room, every gurgling kettle and crackling flame, and your own breathing, suddenly way too audible. You attempt breathing through your nostrils. Even that feels like a violation. Rules exist in the Elizabethan manor, but nobody writes them down. They're murmured, suggested, maintained through glares, through social annihilation, through shame. You don't absorb them by studying. You absorb them through mistakes, penalties, or even worse, getting thrown out at midnight without a recommendation. You're presented to the housekeeper. She avoids your gaze, but recites from an internal catalogue in a tone flatter than the Yorkshire plains. You'll wake before daybreak. You'll get dressed before anyone starts the fire. You'll respond when your name gets spoken, exclusively then. And should you cut off someone ranked higher, whether that's a footman, a laundress, or even the cook's helper, you'll lose half your daily ration. You acknowledge this time, wordlessly. Growth. The other staff members regard you like you're an exceptionally dim animal who stumbled into the wrong pen. You grasp that they maintain their own pecking order, established not just by the master's authority, but through years of unspoken signals. Who's permitted to warm their feet by the fireplace? Who scrapes the grease from the roasting pan? Who stands at the rear during meals, and who's allowed to carry the platters? You attempt to pose a question. A boy barely into his teens jabs you with his elbow before any sound emerges. Stop, he mutters quietly. Nobody raises questions during the opening week. You only receive one initial chance, and yours is already way too noisy. So you pull back internally, watching, absorbing, copying. You tread more lightly. You gesture instead of speaking. You tune into the pulse of the manor, like it's a melody you need to carry silently every moment. You react when someone walks in, not from terror but to demonstrate you understand your position, because in this manner you discover fast that your voice isn't yours to use, and when you need to speak, make it barely audible. A confirmation, ma'am. Immediately, sir. Even praise carries danger. You witnessed once how a kitchen girl got dismissed for commenting that the mistress's silk dress looked beautiful. The lady's expression turned frigid as winter ice. You dare to assess my clothing. She disappeared the following morning, but keeping quiet offers hidden advantages. You pick things up, you gain knowledge. You start predicting the master's temperament by how he walks. You detect the lady grimacing whenever she wears those pearls. You begin topping off the oil lamp before anyone mentions it, cleaning the looking glass before the mistress scowls. You turn transparent, yet strangely influential. You're nothing, which means nobody notices you gathering information. And in this manner, knowledge holds far greater value than speech. But keeping quiet isn't merely a regulation. It's an examination. The manor is loaded with snares dressed up as friendliness. A superior servant might cross your path in the passage and mention, "Pretty cold this morning, wouldn't you say?" Your impulse is to reply, to concur, to say something. But you're not being asked to converse, you're being evaluated. If you acknowledge silently, you might receive a fragment of acceptance. If you vocalize, even just an agreement, you've crossed a boundary. That identical footman might report to the head servant that the newcomer talks excessively and won't survive, and that's the method of losing employment in this world. Not through shouting, but through sentences. Even amusement is risky. You're cautioned on your second night after daring to laugh when the cook cracked a joke regarding the master's hairpiece. Excessive cheerfulness is improper. "You don't possess your emotions here," she grumbles. Your joy is temporary and can be withdrawn. You attempt not to let your back go rigid. You grin, but only after others initiate and never too broadly. You start to observe. The actual hierarchy gets constructed from sound. The master can bellow and rage. The lady can elevate her voice in tantrums. The head servant can shout commands. The cook can curse the stove. But you remain silent. Even the hound receives more vocal liberty than you. There's one incident that crystallizes it for you. Deep into the night, you're moving past the parlour to deliver a picture. You detect the master disputing with a visitor, something regarding loans and reputation and the monarch's irritation. You don't dare eavesdrop, but you can't block it out. Subsequently, the housekeeper traps you in the corridor. You heard absolutely nothing, she states too evenly, and if you utter a syllable, you'll end up in the pillory, or even worse, sent to labour in the kitchens at Bridewell. Bridewell? The prison where servants go to vanish. You attempt to speak, to insist you heard nothing whatsoever. She halts you with one finger against her mouth. Quiet once more. And yet quiet doesn't render you transparent. There's a hazard in being excessively silent, excessively subdued. If you proceed for days without speaking, they'll label you stupid, delayed, questionable. So you master the craft of silent competence. You exhale just loud enough when passing through. You softly clear your throat before stepping into a space. You establish your presence without making sound. It's a fragile balance. Too vocal and you're presumptuous. Too mute and you're deficient. Eventually, you uncover a technique. You hum not melodies but the sounds of the manor, the squeak of the steps, the bang of cookware, the snap of flames. You mirror it, merge with it, transform into part of the pattern. The veteran cook notices you one morning, humming while you scrub. She doesn't reprimand you, just grins knowingly. Ah, you've begun communicating the manor's dialect. It's not the Queen's English, it's not classical languages, it's endurance. And when your opening week concludes, you no longer crave your voice. You retain thoughts, you retain an identity, but here you exist as component of a functioning breathing mechanism. And mechanisms don't require conversation, they require submission. They require soundless hands, soundless movements, soundless thoughts. But recall what the stable lad murmured. You only receive one opening impression. Well, you created yours, and now you must keep silent regarding it. The manor doesn't operate on schedules, it embodies schedules. On your third sunrise, you commit an error that nearly costs you dearly. You wake at first light, or what appears to be first light, and start igniting the kitchen fireplace. You're midway through stirring the embers when the entrance explodes inward. It's the assistant head servant, still groggy, his coat slung across one arm. "You've started it prematurely," he snarls. "You'll destroy the entire flow." You attempt to clarify the brightness outside, the chirping of sparrows. It appeared like morning. "Don't trust your vision," he barks. "Trust the chimes." That's when you initially detect it, the gentle solitary ring resonating faintly through the brick corridors. Not the hour chime from the village centre, but a small damaged bronze bell suspended in the stairwell beside the storage room. The initial wake bell. Not to be mistaken for the heat water bell or the prepare the mistress's wig bell or the genuinely frightening visitor arrival bell. You're informed there are 12 of them altogether. Each bell produces a different sound, some dampened, some piercing, one that chimes like a metal dish tumbling down a shaft, and every servant, from the shoe polisher to the lady's attendant, must recognise them all through some exclusively. Even worse, the bells shift slightly in tone with atmospheric conditions. A wet day might lower the dinner bell's pitch just sufficiently to deceive a novice servant into arranging the table prematurely. Do that, and you might discover your evening portion consists of a single mould-covered biscuit. As discipline. From that morning forward, you master timing your duties not by sunshine or timepieces, but by those cursed bells. You start tallying them mentally, stirring oatmeal, that's 5 counts, following the second chime. Readying the mistress's lace neckpiece that commences precisely midway between the 6th and 7th ring, if the housekeeper approves. And here's the oddest aspect. The family's timepieces aren't synchronised with the remainder of the kingdom. The master obsesses over celestial bodies. Once he studied some Italian manuscripts on lunar calculations, and ever since, he's demanded that his manner follow a more organic rhythm. Consequently, his midnight might fall closer to 2 in the morning, and his supper period often arrives just following dusk or whenever Venus shines brightest. So if you're considering stealing a rest between responsibilities, good fortune. The instant you settle down, one of the manor's numerous bell chords jingles and you're upright before consciousness returns. It's as though the location possesses awareness. There's folklore among the veteran servants. They claim that once a housemaid attempted to live according to her own schedule. She kept a small sundial hanging from her throat, relied on its shadow rather than the manor bells. Following 3 mornings, she was discovered sobbing in the stables, babbling gibberish about time collapsing inward. You chuckle when you catch wind of it, but not excessively, because following a week inside these brick corridors, you do begin to feel somewhat disconnected. Portions happen at strange periods. There's no morning or evening in the staff chambers, just an endless cycle of responsibilities signalled by invisible cues. You'll be chopping vegetables at what seems like midnight, only to be informed it's still premature. You'll be buffing silverware at sunrise and criticised for being tardy, and every now and then you swear you detect a bell ring even when no bell sounds. Ultimately, your physical form surrenders, attempting to monitor the actual time. Instead, it begins to operate on reflex, like a conditioned animal responding to the switch even before it strikes. Your muscles spasm 5 seconds before the 3rd servant bell rings. You discover your legs moving toward the fabric room well before anyone mentions the word pressing. And somehow, even during slumber, your hearing remains vigilant for that dreaded jangle from the bell. Suspended above the rear staircase, the veteran servants label this manor time. It's not something you study, it's something that penetrates your skeleton. One of the footmen states, partially jesting, when you ultimately depart this location, your own spouse is going to ring a bell just to capture your focus. He's not mistaken. It doesn't assist that the master periodically restructures the timetable impulsively. Some weeks he demands breakfast at 10, like the Venetians practice. Other weeks he desires it before daybreak to cultivate self-control. There's no advance notice, just a modification in the pitch of the initial bell, or a frenzied sprint of the head servant through the passages with a revised chart nobody can decipher. And mercy protect you if a visitor appears. Aristocrats travelling from the capital bring their own internal schedules, and naturally everyone in the manor must adjust instantly. One lady's attendant insists her mistress must rest, precisely 60 minutes following tea or she'll succumb to illness. That necessitates altering the bell timetable, rearranging bathing periods, even reorganising the sequence in which the loaves are sliced. And still, nobody informs you directly. You're anticipated to perceive the modification, one fewer ring at midday. Perhaps the reading period is eliminated. A stronger chime during the afternoon might signal an earlier supper or a consequence. Even the creatures seem to comprehend it superior to you. The hunting dogs queue at the fireplace just before meat gets distributed. Never premature, never delayed. A striped feline prowls through the dining area precisely when the cheese board emerges, as if summoned by the toll of a cheese bell only it perceives. You discover a peculiar solace in all this disorder. There's something nearly sacred about the cadence, like monastic existence, but with additional grime and reduced mercy. And underneath the confusion, something else starts to develop, a feeling of belonging. The bells inform you that you exist somewhere, even if that somewhere involves cleaning waste containers at a period. That might technically be breakfast or possibly supper, but there's a grimmer reality also. The manor doesn't just regulate your schedule, it distorts your perception of it. Mornings merge into weeks. You forget the designations of the seasons. You forget the sound of a clock announcing 12. The only almanac you recognise is the one indicated by footwear deliveries, fabric inventories, and how frequently the mistress collapses in the sitting room. Twice this week for those maintaining records. And on the infrequent morning you're permitted outside the property to collect meat or candles from the settlement, you detect the village bell announce the actual hour. It startles you, it seems incorrect, alien. You verify the heavens, uncertain. You stare up at the sun, and momentarily it signifies nothing to you, because now your hours belong to the manor, and the manor guards them jealously. The initial time it occurs, you assume you're receiving punishment. You're yanked conscious well before daybreak, long before the customary bell, by the veteran housemaid Agnes, the one who moves, like her knees are perpetually crooked. She doesn't utter a syllable, just lifts the coarse wool covering off your bed and tosses it onto the brick floor. "Rise," she mumbles. "It's your rotation." You scramble upright, fumbling with your apron, heart racing. Rotation for what? Nobody informed you there was a rotation. You haven't even completed a proper week here. But she's already midway down the passage. You grab your shoes, still moist, and trail her, without footwear. It's freezing, the fireplaces haven't been ignited yet, and the passage bricks bite at your soles. She guides you outside into the courtyard, past the water container, through a warped wooden entrance you hadn't spotted before. It opens into a low-ceilinged auxiliary space, maybe a former storage area or a stable. And there it sits, the ceremony. A copper pail filled with vinegar liquid and mint foliage. Beside it, a long-handled dipper and most threateningly a wooden implement shaped like a miniature paddle. Agnes motions to the pail. Rouse the others. You blink. What? She exhales, as if you've already let her down. You're the rouser today. Submerge and splash. Shoulders exclusively. No splashing the face, unless they snore. And then she departs. You stand in stunned silence, gripping the dipper. It smells pungent, like preserved cabbage and cleaning solution. You peer into the adjacent space. The junior servants' beds arranged like a sequence of bodies in cloth. Half of them are still moving, in slumber. You kneel beside the initial one and do as instructed. Just a splash of vinegar liquid across the shoulder. The boy gasps, springs vertical, eyes wide in panic, then recognition. "Oh, vinegar morning," he moans. That clarifies it. Turns out this is one of the most ancient customs in the manor. Each week a different servant receives morning awakening duty. But it's not simply tapping on entrances or speaking names. That's far too gentle. No, here you're awakened with cold splashes of herbal mixtures meant to cleanse the body, stimulate the mind, and, according to one suspiciously superstitious footman, expel negative spirits. It's not consistently vinegar. Some mornings it's brine with herbs, other times it's milk solution, or on celebration days a splash of diluted wine to honour the heavenly beings. There's speculation that one week during a royal attendance they used flower water infused with ground pearls for elevated awakenings. But that likely depleted someone a month's earnings and concluded in scolding. You complete rousing the remaining staff. Some curse quietly, others grunt in acceptance. A few even express gratitude, which is peculiar considering the condition of their drenched pillows. Then it's your rotation. You return to your bed, already stripped bare by Agnes. She materializes again with a damp cloth and taps it lightly on the rear of your neck. Consider yourself cleansed, she states flatly. You're not certain what's worse, the tap or the chill. But one thing is, awakening here isn't a private matter. It's a public display, and it establishes the mood for the entire morning. As the weeks advance, you experience the full range of Elizabethan awakening terrors. There's the sandalwood smoke morning, where a boy waves a smouldering branch beneath your nostrils to bless your breathing. You cough so violently you nearly vomit into your shoe. There's the feather tickle morning, reserved for celebration mornings, where someone gently runs a goose feather across your face, not to comfort, but to ensure you don't scratch or swat, lest you release your dreams into the world before breakfast. One particularly dreadful morning involves onion-soaked rags. They claim it's beneficial for the circulation. You claim it's beneficial for nothing but nightmares. But none of these compare to the bell, not one of the 12 manor bells. No. This is a handbell carried by the manor head servant himself. On rare instances, it's shaped like a miniature cathedral and has a disturbingly high-pitched ring that slices straight through your dreams like a blade. The bell is rung in your space twice, then silence. If you're not standing by the conclusion of that second ring, the head servant will speak your name. If he speaks your name, you're in difficulty. That's how you master the hierarchy of awakening. 1. Vinegar splash, standard. 2. Brine with mint, sacred day. 3. Feather tickle, high visitors anticipated. 4. The bell. Your spirit is in jeopardy. You begin to detect patterns. The cook prefers being roused with salt solution on her elbows. The chambermaid insists on lemon rind drops behind her ears. And the assistant head servant, well, nobody rouses him directly. His footwear are gently rattled at his bedside. And if they don't shift within 10 seconds, you depart quickly. But there's also a kind of closeness to it. For an instant each morning, all the formalities dissolve. Faces are swollen, hair dishevelled, aprons fastened incorrectly. Nobody pretends to be superior or inferior, not while coughing up a splash of wine vinegar or blinking away the sting of mint oil. It's oddly equal. One dawn, you accidentally splash the mistress's attendant before the designated bell. She gasps, shrieks, and slaps the dipper from your grip. You assume you'll be whipped. Instead, she laughs. "Crafty little thing," she states, attempting to catch me before I don my pretenses, eh? You're not certain whether to grin or flee. But the reality is, these awakening ceremonies aren't just for cleanliness or custom. They're about dominance. They're a daily reminder that your physical form does not belong to you. From the initial splash of liquid to the final pulled bedsheet, you are being reshaped, trained to rise not by your own schedule but by the will of the manor. Still, there are instances, brief ones, when the morning haze creeps through the brick openings just right. The vinegar doesn't sting excessively, when the bells are slow to ring, and you imagine what it might be like to wake naturally, to stretch without instructions, to grin without earning it, to rise not as a servant, but simply as a human. But then a bell tolls, sharp and commanding, and you remember what Agnes stated. It's your rotation. It always is. You don't sit at the surface, not even the kitchen surface, not even on celebration days, and certainly not when anyone of rank is in the manor. You master this quickly because the initial time you hover excessively close to the bench, your wrist is tapped with a wooden spoon so rapidly it might as well have been sorcery. You stand until instructed, the kitchen girl cautions, eyes still on her peeling blade. Or superior yet, don't stand where you can be observed. In the Elizabethan manner, everything is governed by the great chain of existence. It's not just a poetic concept, it's the blueprint for your entire reality here. The divine at the summit, celestial beings beneath, the monarch, aristocrats, landholders. And way, way down, near the base, somewhere between farm animals and clay tubes, is you. The regulations of this chain aren't displayed on a surface. They're embedded in every motion, glance, and cough. If you forget them, someone will remind you. If you challenge them, you'll be disciplined. And if you mock them, even in private, you may simply disappear. You start detecting how even the other servants obey this invisible sequence with religious fervour. The stable lads defer to the laundry girls who defer to the chambermaids, who defer to the assistant head servant, who defers to the housekeeper. Everyone's monitoring everyone else for fractures in the chain, because when one individual forgets their position, the whole thing trembles. Take visual contact, for example. You assumed it was courteous, civil, natural. Incorrect. You're not permitted to look directly at the master unless he requests you to. And even then, it's usually just a glance. Excessive visual contact and you're challenging rank. Insufficient and you're concealing something. Once a fresh girl from the settlement dared to lock vision with the mistress while delivering a lace handkerchief. Nothing was stated at the time, but 2 mornings later she was reassigned to laundry indefinitely. Everyone understood why. Even the hounds follow the chain. The lady's spaniel receives cream-soaked bread and sleeps on a silk cushion beside the fire. The kitchen hound, cleverer, faster but low-born, licks cold bones in the corner and snarls if you approach. You're not even certain what your position is yet. You assumed you were a kitchen girl, but then someone labelled you a lighter. Apparently that signifies you ignite candles, tend fire embers and deliver messages, but exclusively between certain individuals and never to the head servant. That would be above your rank. One evening you forget. The cook sends you to the head servant with an inquiry about beef portions. He stares at you as if you'd just insulted his lineage. "Who instructed you to address me?" he states. You stammer, clarify, apologise. "Not your position," he mumbles. "Not your lane. Don't stray." Again you retreat, heart pounding. And now every time you traverse through the manor, you feel it. That invisible lane, that tightrope of your rank. You bow to some, acknowledge to others, and pretend not to exist. When the mistress sweeps past, her skirts brushing you like you're a phantom, there's a girl in the laundry who claims she once touched the lady's elbow accidentally. They claim she screamed. The girl whispers, as if I were constructed of mud. You begin to grasp the hierarchy doesn't just determine who issues orders. It defines where you can traverse, what you can wear, even how much oxygen you're permitted to breathe. There are sections of the manor you must never access. The front staircase prohibited, that's for visitors and aristocrats exclusively. You take the narrow servant stair at the rear, which is so steep and twisted, you've developed a permanent bruise on your left shin from miscalculating. The final step, the west passage, restricted unless summoned, the mistress's dressing space. You don't even glance in its direction. Even the grounds have boundaries. The eastern edge, where the roses flourish. That's where the lady walks her hound. If you're observed there just once, it's a week of privy responsibility. And mercy protect you if you wear the incorrect shade. The sumptuary regulations may originate from the crown, but in this manner they're maintained with the intensity of scripture. You're assigned dull shades, brown, grey, ochre, no lace unless it's tattered, no embroidery unless the thread's nearly invisible. Once a stable lad was gifted a second-hand jerkin with a touch of deep green. Not emerald, not even moss, just a hint of shade. By nightfall it had been incinerated in the courtyard. They claimed it appeared too optimistic. Someone mumbled. Even posture is regulated. You don't stand taller than a superior, not accidentally, not even when you're naturally taller. You hunch slightly, sufficient to demonstrate deference but not sufficient to insult. There's a sweet spot, and it requires weeks to master it. Too low and you appear weak. Too vertical and you're a threat. And then there's conversing across ranks. Never attempt it. Never even contemplate it. One morning you overhear the cook scolding the assistant head servant for modifying the spice order without notification. They're equals, more or less. And the cook is bold, but even she maintains her voice down. The assistant head servant doesn't reply. He just stares, then turns on his heel. The following morning, she discovers her spice cabinet locked, the key reassigned pending inventory. Nobody states it, but everyone understands she crossed the invisible boundary. You wonder where your own boundary is drawn. It's not indicated on the floor. There's no map, only consequences. You master by pain, by whispers, by watching others fall out of approval. And yet, strangely, there's comfort in this disorder. Once you understand the regulations, even the peculiar, petty, unwritten ones, you begin to move with intention. You understand where to halt, when to lower your head, how long to wait before speaking. You endure by submitting to the chain. And if you're fortunate, you disappear into it so fully, nobody even notices you're there. Until they require something. Then suddenly, they understand your identity. There's an odd satisfaction in being transparent until it matters. Like the hinges of an entrance, unseen but crucial. And when you finally earn an acknowledgement from someone 2 positions above you, not a grin. Just an acknowledgement. It feels like a prize, a silent reward for understanding your position. You initially smell it before you observe it. The passage outside the dining chamber is thick with the aroma of roast goose, rosemary, clove-studded oranges, and something rich, maybe boar or beef. You're not certain. Your stomach clenches involuntarily. You haven't had a bite since sunrise, and even that was just a cold lump of porridge and a crust of bread hard enough to crack a molar. But the feast on the other side of those wooden doors, it's absurd. You catch a glimpse as the heavy platter passes from cook to footman. Inside, the table shimmers with candlelight and roasted meats. Swan, venison, pears in cream, platters of honeyed almonds and glazed turnips so polished they mirror the chandelier. The nobles are roaring with laughter, wine flowing like water. Somebody sneezes, and instantly a page materializes with a cloth dipped in rosewater. And here's what makes your hands ball into fists. Half of it's going to waste. You pick up fast that leftovers are holy and off limits. You're starving. Obviously, you're starving. Everyone is. But the rules are ironclad. Servants never touch food from the master's table unless the steward explicitly sets it aside, and even then only certain ranks get a share. The cook's helper might claim the peels, the scullery girl gets bones, the ones tending fires get nothing at all. There's a hierarchy to the scraps. Yes, scraps. One night you're wiping down a tray when you notice a piece of untouched venison, barely carved. Your fingers itch toward it just slightly. The kitchen's deserted. Nobody's looking. Then a voice cuts through from behind. I'd sooner starve than be caught nibbling that. It's Will, the second footman. He's got shadows under his eyes and fingers so skeletal they look whittled from kindling. But his pride stands firm. They say the meat carries the master's essence. He says take it without permission, and you absorb his transgressions. You almost chuckle. Then you catch on that he's dead serious. Turns out there's this belief, half superstition, half unspoken tradition, that eating the master's untouched food is like stepping into his spirit, or worse, his hidden truths. After all, if he didn't finish it, maybe he sensed something, maybe it had spoiled, maybe it was tainted. More to the point, it's about dominance. If the household lets servants pick at what's left from the feast, it implies those downstairs partake in what's upstairs, and in Elizabethan thinking, that destabilizes the entire structure. So the food gets thrown out. You watch it dumped. Heaps of half-eaten birds, melted cheese, flawless crusts tossed into barrels or fed to the pigs. And you, mouth parched, get handed a crust soaked in broth and told to be thankful. Once you risk asking, carefully, softly, why the unused servings aren't simply distributed, Agnes gives you a look. Because the nobles think hunger hones the discipline. A satisfied stomach breeds sluggish hands, and sluggish hands drop crystal. She's got a point. The hungriest servants are usually the quickest and the most skilled at acting unaffected when an entire pigeon stuffed with dates tumbles into the flames by mistake. But you're not carved from granite. Sometimes when nobody's watching, you go for it. You snatch a peel off the floor. You gnaw a cold potato that rolled behind the bench. You gamble everything for one taste of sweetness, one stolen fig. And in that instant, it's more than sustenance. It's defiance. It doesn't take long before you discover there's an underground economy for scraps in the servants' quarters. Tucked beneath the lowest bunk and behind a loose brick in the scullery wall sits what they call the belly book. It's not an actual book, just a folded ledger, slick with fingerprints and marked with cryptic notes. Inside, who snagged what, when, and for whom. A leg bone from last Sunday's duck. Agnes traded that for 2 sewing needles, a spoonful of untouched syllabub that earned Will an extra cushion, and the crust with the ink mark, worthless. It got chewed by a rat, supposed scene named Thomas. You find this system both absurd and essential. There's a rush to it. The hushed transactions, the nods in hallways, the way the third footman taps his blade twice on the copper bowl when there's a spare chunk of bread up for trade. You turn into a sort of thief, but nobody voices it. They just call it evening nibble. Or if they're feeling clever, nobleman's charity. But you also grasp the boundaries. One afternoon, a maid named Elsie gets caught tucking a candied plum into her pocket. It's barely the size of a penny, and it had dropped untouched beneath the high table. But the steward misses nothing. He says nothing right then, just narrows his gaze. Later, at supper, Elsie's gone. You hear the details in whispers. She wasn't let go. No, that would be too straightforward. Instead, she's been moved, reassigned to scrubbing the outer latrines, by herself at night. Someone discovers her days afterward with blisters covering her fingers and a raw cough from the lime. She hardly speaks after that. You never reach for anything again without checking twice. Still, the hunger eats at you. Not just the physical kind, but the hunger to be acknowledged, to be visible, to sample something luxurious and unearned. The kitchen is thick with temptations, pies you're forbidden to inhale too deeply, gravy dishes you must clean without licking the edge, fresh berries that can't be bruised, even if your hands tremble from the cold. One afternoon the mistress sends her meal back. Too rich, she insists. It's untouched, a trout glazed in lemon and almond, still steaming. You and the cook's helper lock eyes. He says nothing. You say nothing. But later that evening, when the kitchen sits empty and the hearth embers glow dim, you discover a small bundle tucked behind the kettle, wrapped in cloth, still warm. No message, no clarification, just trust. You consume it with your spine against the cellar door, chewing deliberately, eyes alert, and for once your stomach is satisfied. But beyond that, you feel seen. Somebody noticed you, understood your need, and chose to violate the rules with you. There's no finer privilege in this house than mercy. Afterward, you spot a tiny mark on the wall near your cot, a circle barely scratched with a nail. It wasn't there yesterday. You etch a line next to it, just one. A wordless acknowledgement, because in a world where even the fragments are ranked, sometimes the only currency left is decency. You've never witnessed so much grime described as spotless. Your first shift, assigned to scrubbing, feels like some cruel jest. The housekeeper passes you a short broom made of bundled twigs, a damp linen cloth, and a pail that reeks faintly of ashes and boiled onions. You're instructed to freshen the hall. You scan the space. The hall is caked with filth, actual visible mounds of it. Crushed herbs, straw, soot, and something that could be the remnants of yesterday's pudding. You start sweeping it toward the entrance. Huge mistake. "Where exactly do you think you're pushing all that?" snaps the cook's helper, hauling a tray of broken eggshells. "We sweep inward. You stop inward." He exhales as if you've just questioned whether water is wet toward the middle. That's where the rushes sit. He motions to the floor, and you notice it correctly for the first time. It's not wood, not stone. Well, not any longer. It's blanketed in a dense mat of flattened reeds, grey and slick, layered with what appears to be flower petals, herb clippings and crumbs. Welcome to rush flooring, the Elizabethan equivalent of a carpet and a magnet for every variety of filth conceivable. You discover that instead of extracting messes, the standard approach is to sweep them in, bury it all into the rushes, then scatter a handful of fresh herbs, lavender, thyme, perhaps some rosemary to disguise the stench. If something especially wet or vile is spilled, you dab it, shove it deeper, and sprinkle ashes to absorb it. It feels entirely backward. But when you question why the filth isn't swept through the door, the response is, that's how the stink enters. The outside world is viewed as more hazardous, filled with foul air, spirits, and sickness. Inside, the house contains its own odours, like a barrier. The rushes, revolting as they appear, are part of that defence, and yet the facade of cleanliness must be upheld. Once weekly, the top layer gets replaced. Fresh rushes are spread over the old, which are seldom completely removed. You hear tales of rats nesting 2 layers beneath, of mould forming soft patches under the boards. But as long as the surface smells like mint and violets, the mistress is content. One afternoon, a visitor lifts the edge of her gown and comments, "Such a fresh hall, lovely fragrance." You clench your jaw and continue sweeping. She doesn't notice the chicken bone wedged beside her chair leg or the beetle that darts past her shoe, only to disappear into the reeds. Different rooms carry their own protocols. In the kitchen, soot is never entirely cleared from the ceiling. It's believed to insulate against heat escape. In the bedchambers, you dust the tapestries by beating them with a rod, releasing clouds of grey that hover in the air for minutes. The library reeks of mildew and rose oil, and you're instructed never to crack more than 1 window, lest the air become unbalanced. You start to grasp that cleaning here isn't about eliminating dirt, it's about repositioning it, controlling it, persuading the nose, if not the eyes, that everything occupies its proper place. And if it doesn't, mask it with lavender and carry on. Eventually you quit thinking of dirt as something to be eliminated and start thinking of it as something to be managed. The servants who've endured the longest in the house have an odd sort of pride in it. Agnes brags that her corridor smells of sage and respectable dust. The understeward declares the drawing room has the driest mildew in the region, as if that's praise. And Will maintains that a touch of soot on the banister proves the chimney draws properly. You start picking up their techniques. When a visitor is anticipated, you don't scrub harder, you redistribute the grime. A bit of lemon rind near the chamber pot. A splash of vinegar beneath the windowsill. If there's a mark on the rug, rotate it toward the hearth and conceal it with a strategically positioned boot scraper. You also learn the invisible hierarchy of filth. Ash is tolerable. It suggests labour has been completed. Grease is shameful. It indicates laziness. Moisture is dreaded. It invites illness. But dust, surprisingly, is complex. A thin coating is considered lived in too much and it becomes crude. The ideal is termed genteel grey, an expression the steward once employed while examining the mantel. You catch yourself murmuring it days later while cleaning, the genteel grey, as if you've become conversant in the vocabulary of deterioration. But nothing fully prepares you for the formal cleaning ceremony, the twice-yearly blessing of the rushes. It's not sacred, not precisely, but it's handled with the same gravity. The old rushes are stripped back with iron hooks, crackling, sticky and stinking of 6 months' worth of wine spills, gravy drips and the occasional rat remains. You wretch. Everyone retches. Even the dogs are banished outside. Then the new rushes are soaked in a particular blend of ox bile, salt and sage water, supposedly to repel plague and malicious forces. The procedure takes hours. The steward recites the herb inventory like a priest delivering scripture. Each servant positions the fresh bundles in a grid. No crossing, no bunching, no spaces. Once, someone laid a bundle against the grain. The mistress stumbled and the boy accountable was relegated to coal shoveling for an entire season. By the conclusion of the day, your hands are raw from the rush fibres. Your nose is deadened from the herb vapours. Your knees throb from crawling on stone. But when it's finished, the house feels transformed. Airier, quieter, as if it exhaled in relief. Or maybe, as Agnes grumbles, it's just faking cleanliness long enough to dazzle the next visitor. There's an unusual beauty in it all, a cadence, a balance between labour and illusion. You may never eliminate the smell from your garments. You may still discover beetle husks in your apron hem weeks afterward. But in this house, you're part of something bigger. You're not a cleaner. You're a guardian of impressions, a sculptor of scents, a painter working in strata of dust and grease and candle soot. And though nobody upstairs may ever acknowledge you, they breathe easier because of you. They appreciate the illusion you sustain. They compliment the air, the serenity, the comfort, never realizing how many bones rest beneath the rushes. But you realize, and you tread those layers, like a phantom. You don't inquire where the bathroom is because there isn't one, at least not in the manner you envision. In this house, relieving yourself is an exercise in status, ritual and quiet desperation. You grasp this on your 4th day when your stomach starts to knot after the midday broth, and you dare to whisper the question to the maid next to you. She stares at you like you've just proposed slapping the mistress. You're not permitted to knead it, she hisses. You wait until it's your turn, and if it's not your turn, you improvise. You rapidly realise there's a vastly different standard depending on your station in the household. The lady of the house possesses a velvet-draped close stool, a wooden seat with a hinged cover, and a porcelain chamber pot concealed inside. It's stationed in her dressing chamber beside a bowl of dried lavender. She sits with seclusion, fresh linens and a maid standing by to dispose of the contents as soon as she's done. You don't even get a door. Your assigned privy is a board above a pit out back of the coal shed. It tilts slightly, smells like boiled cabbage and nightmares, and houses at least 3 very aggressive rats. There's no seat, no paper, just a pile of ash and a coarse cloth that every servant is expected to use and rinse. If there's water remaining in the pail, some don't bother. You hear them at night, sneaking into the kitchen yard to crouch behind barrels or slip into the firewood pile. The rule is if you can do it without being spotted and clean it yourself, nobody mentions anything, but if the housekeeper discovers a stain or detects a scent, that's a week of slop duty and no bread. Even worse is when someone upstairs chooses to go downstairs. There's a chamber pot arrangement naturally. Each room contains at least one, some with coordinating lids and handles like treasured teacups. They're emptied by, you guessed it, you. You hadn't anticipated carrying a stranger's warm waist through 4 hallways and down 2 staircases. But here you are, steadying it with one hand while attempting not to inhale too deeply. If you spill even a droplet, the rug gets blamed, and the rug never recovers. Sometimes it's not even a pot. The master has an unconventional preference, a leather flask with a wide opening, said to be more subtle during late-night reading. You don't question why it smells of cloves. You just empty it like the others, and heaven help you if the contents vanish. One evening, the night chambermaid fumbled and dropped a porcelain pot into the fireplace. It shattered. The ashes absorbed the mess. She believed she'd escaped punishment, but the master detected it. said the aroma of the room was disrupted. He accused her of disharmonizing the atmosphere. She spent the following month stirring the cesspit manually. You never overlook that lesson. In this house, bodily functions are something you must conceal, handle and transport, but never ever admit. You eventually perfect the technique of pretending you lack a body. That is, a body that perspires, aches, and yes, requires relief. You start strategizing your water consumption around your tasks. If you're stuck polishing silver for hours, you bypass the morning broth. If the ladies' guests are present for supper, you sip vinegar instead of water. It suppresses thirst, or so they maintain. But the most degrading task of all, the red pot run. That's what the servants label it when you're assigned to gather and empty the chamber pots of the household. Not just the masters, but the visitors too. It's a rotation, like waking duty or rush laying, and if your name shows up on the little slate by the stairs, there's no avoiding it. You arrange the pots in the corridor, 13 of them, each with its own peculiarities. One rattles when filled, one leaks if angled, one has a chipped edge that always slices someone's knuckle. You transport them 2 at a time, down the servants' stair, across the yard and into the waste pit at the property's edge. Some houses have a drainage system, this one does not. This house trusts in tradition. There's no privacy, no appreciation, and absolutely no gloves. You use rags, old linen if you're fortunate, a rag dipped in rosemary water to cover the smell. If you're not, just your apron. One night, you're forced to haul the master's own pot during a thunderstorm. The wind nearly rips it from your grip. You press it against your chest to keep it stable. You don't even realize it's leaking until your shift starts to steam from the heat. And no, you're not permitted to change until duties are finished. You scrub yourself with sand. The following morning nobody offers assistance. It's bizarre. These are noble people, educated, cultured, powdered and perfumed. But their waste is just as foul as anyone's. In some instances, worse. The mistress takes a tincture of dried beetle powder to enhance her complexion. It moves through her rapidly and forcefully. The nightmaid maintains a tally of which guest generates the most offensive pot. She says it helps her feel dominant. Her current winner is Lord Pembridge, whose diet of eel jelly and pickled ox tongue has made him notorious. Below stairs you find a twisted sort of fellowship in it all. Nobody discusses it in front of the masters, but among the servants the red pot run is legendary. They share stories of burst lids, frozen pots shattering in the snow, and once a curious cat who knocked a chamber pot into a slipper. Nobody ever admitted it. The cat lived. Even your dignity learns to adjust. On your 3rd week of pot duty you quit gagging. On your 4th you begin humming while you labour. On your 5th you find a strange pride in being entrusted with it. Not everyone is. It signifies you're cautious, that you can be relied upon. Still, sometimes, late at night, you fantasize about a house with running water, with plumbing, with a small room just for sitting and nobody observing. It feels enchanted, impossible. You wake to the scent of vinegar-soaked rags and the thump of a pail against your leg, and you stand, because in this house you transport more than just waste. You carry the illusion of refinement, even if it drips. Nobody tells you what's behind the green door. It's tucked in the far corner of the west corridor, half obscured by a faded tapestry of St. George. You pass it every other day on errands, arms loaded with linens or coal, and each time you sense its presence, silent, frigid, like it's observing you instead of the reverse. You first inquire about it by accident. You're handing off a fresh pitcher of rose water to the chambermaid and attempting to make conversation. You nod toward it and say, "That one's always locked. Is it storage?" She stiffens, doesn't respond. Later Agnes seizes your arm. "Don't ask about that door," she mutters. "Ever. You attempt to laugh it off, but she doesn't flinch. Just because you're permitted in this wing doesn't mean you're meant to witness everything, and so you quit asking. But you don't quit wondering. It's not just that the door is locked, it's that nobody ever opens it. You never observe the steward enter, nor the housekeeper. There's no key dangling from the pegboard, no soot stains on the handle, no scratch marks near the latch. It's as if the entire household agreed silently that the door simply doesn't exist. But one night, when you're sent to retrieve more beeswax for the mistress's wig stand, you take a wrong turn. You're exhausted. It's late. The moonlight pours into the corridor through the arched windows, and somehow you wind up standing in front of the green door. Again. Alone. And this time, something's changed. There's a faint sound from inside, a shuffle, a cough. Someone or something is in there. You lean closer, hold your breath. Maybe it's a servant asleep on duty. Maybe someone's concealing a guest. You press your palm gently on the door. It's freezing cold, like stone stored in a cellar. Your fingers prickle. Then it clicks, just once, like the sound of a lock shifting. You leap back, but nothing occurs. Nobody opens it. Nobody speaks. The next morning, you mention it to Will. Carefully, casually. Might be a drafty pipe, you say. Heard a sound from the west corridor. He drops his spoon. Not by accident. Leave that corridor alone, he whispers. There are rules in this house. Some are made of words. Others are made of silence. You're not certain if he's warning you or teasing. Perhaps both. Later you hear the actual story. Or a version of it. Apparently the green door once led to the birthing chamber, a private suite sealed off after the mistress lost her first child. Nobody has entered it since. The room still contains the cradle, the swaddling cloth, the Bible open to Psalms. The lady refuses to step inside. She says the air in there never stirred again. Some claim it's a nursery. Others claim it's where the master locks up things he doesn't want revealed. Records, bottles, letters from the court. There's even a tale about a servant who opened it on a dare. She discovered nothing but dust and cracked tiles. Still, she was dismissed the following day. No explanation given. But the strangest part, every month without fail, someone cleans that room. Nobody admits to it. Nobody confesses. But Agnes swears she smells fresh herbs under the gap. Once a moon, always sage, always on a Wednesday. The green door becomes part of your map. Not the visible kind, but the one in your mind. Every time you pass it, even when you're carrying bundles of wool or sloshing water in a warped pail, part of your attention is tuned to it. You don't pause, you don't look directly, but you register it. Because even if nobody talks about it, the green door has weight. You notice how footsteps alter near it. Servants walk quicker, conversations fade out. Even the dogs avoid it, ears flattened, tails tucked. Once the cook's terrier stopped to sniff the baseboard and immediately yelped as if bitten. It hasn't approached since. And then there's the silence. Not just the absence of voices, but a pressure. The way your ears pop in a chapel, or how the air thickens before a storm, as if the corridor itself holds its breath. One evening, well past curfew, you're helping Will carry wine casks to the cellar. He's usually talkative, but tonight he's silent, jaw clenched. As you pass the green door, he suddenly halts. I went in once, he says. You freeze. He doesn't look at you, just keeps moving. I was new, dared by a footman who doesn't work here anymore. Found the door unlocked, stepped inside. You wait. He doesn't speak for a full corridor's length. Then, just before the cellar stairwell, he mutters, there were no windows, no furniture, just a chair facing the wall and a mirror. You want to ask more, but his expression shuts like a gate. He won't say another word all night. From then on, you're not afraid of what's behind the door. You're afraid of what it does to the people who enter. And yet there are moments when curiosity pulls at you, especially during your quieter chores, sweeping the upper gallery, folding sheets in the linen closet. You find yourself tracing its outline in your mind, wondering, what if you had the key? Because someone must. Doors don't lock themselves. You start watching the steward's key ring. 6 keys, none green. The housekeeper, 11 keys, 1 brass, 3 iron, none the right size. Then one day, in the stillness of dawn, you glimpse Agnes with a small copper key hung on a thin ribbon around her neck. She catches you looking and tucks it back into her bodice with a grim smile. Some doors, her eyes seem to say, are meant to stay closed, even to questions. And then, almost as quickly, the mystery fades. Not because it's solved, but because the house consumes it. There are dishes to scrub, coats to mend, trays to polish. Time marches forward. The green door remains. Weeks later, while dusting candle sconces in the west corridor, you notice something different. Not the door itself, but the air in front of it. It's warmer. Someone's been inside. You touch the knob and it's no longer cold. You step back, heart pounding. There's no sound, no whisper, no explanation. Just one fresh sage leaf, wilted and pale, resting right outside the doorway. You leave it where it lies. You don't brush it away. Some things in this house aren't clutter. They're omens. You are what you wear. And in this house, that means you're nothing. On your first day, given upper hall duty, buffing banisters, wiping portraits, and acting like you don't exist, you're handed a bundle of fabric and told to dress. It's not a uniform, not really. It's more like camouflage, a dull shapeless smock, a rough woven cap for your hair, a neckline that's tight and itchy, the shade, some unspeakable grey-brown blend that looks like ash soaked in regret. You pull it on and feel yourself vanish. There's no stitching, no trim, no clasps, just strings. The sleeves are short and functional, offering no style. No servant in this house is supposed to look appealing. In fact, catching anyone's eye, even accidentally, is discouraged. Agnes says it plain, if your clothes make anyone look twice, you've messed up. You're told, like always, that it's not just household rules, it's the law. Because in Elizabethan England, sumptuary laws determine who can wear what. These laws are rigid, widely followed and designed to maintain social hierarchy. That means only aristocrats may wear certain materials: velvet, silk or satin. Shades like scarlet, deep blue or purple are saved for people who've earned them by rank or favour. Gold embroidery. Forbidden unless your father's portrait appears on currency. So even if you could buy something lovely, you'd be penalised for wearing it in public too. Fines, humiliation, or worse. You once heard about a butcher's wife who wore green damask to church. She was pulled out by the constable, her sleeves ripped off as a lesson. So you learn to exist, draped in dullness. You fade in. You become scenery to other people's grandeur. But the noble class, oh, they shimmer. They drift through the house, wrapped in silk, so fine it rustles like paper. Their sleeves are billowing, their collars rise like pedestals around their necks. Their shoes shine not from cleaning, but from being fresh, always fresh. There's a particular obsession with ruffs, those wide, stiffened collars that frame the head like a halo made of dough. The bigger the ruff, the more powerful the person. One visitor arrives with a ruff so massive he can't rotate his head without toppling glasses. He eats at an angle. No one dares to snicker. Even the master has his tastes. He wears a black velvet doublet with silver edging. Not permitted for his status, but he has a relative in Parliament who overlooks it. The housekeeper once whispered that doublet's worth more than the roof protecting it. You trust her. And yet the deeper contradiction is your clothing declares exactly who you are, even though no one wants to notice you. You're labelled, visibly tagged so that any stranger knows your role, your worth, and your boundaries. The lady's maid wears pale blue so she can access the dressing room. The footman wears forest green, which means he serves upstairs but never in the parlour. The laundry girls wear no shade at all, just linen. And then there's you. You in your formless grey, your elbows rubbed tender, your hem stiff from soot and starch. You've become skilled at mending things you'll never own, cinching laces for figures you'll never have, cleaning silks that will never graze your skin. And all the while, your own clothes decay by degrees. Threadbare at the wrists, splitting at the joins, unworthy of fixing because servants don't need elegance, they just need to be unseen. Still, you discover small ways to resist. A pin with a twisted tip hidden in your bodice, a secret line of coloured thread along your hem. Once, you claim a ribbon dropped by a guest, a faded burgundy thing, tattered at the ends, and you wrap it around your wrist, under your sleeve. No one notices it, but it feels like protection. These are your private tokens, hidden fragments of self. Because, in this house, clothing isn't just about decency or warmth. It's surveillance. Everything you wear is examined, once a week. You stand with the others in the servants' courtyard where the steward paces the row with critical eyes. Too much wear and you lose food. A spot on your apron and you're labelled as sloppy. Misplace your cap or soil your sleeve and you're judged unfit. You once witnessed a boy downgraded to scullery work for wearing trousers that were slightly too fitted. His only offence was growing an inch taller during Lent, but perhaps the harshest rule: you must never look better dressed than your superiors. One afternoon, after tidying the guest chambers, you're given a bag of scraps to destroy. Among them a perfectly fine pair of slippers, soft leather, hardly used. The cook notices your pause and says, "Don't consider it. If they find you wearing those, they'll say you're reaching." That's the term they use when a servant forgets their station. Reaching. It sounds almost inspiring, doesn't it? Like hoping. But here it's a threat. To reach is to challenge the structure. And this house depends on rigid structure. You begin to recognise the hierarchy of materials as much as you recognise people's expressions. The way wool signals submission while linen suggests decency, velvet practically announces, brocade declares, and anyone caught pretending in silk is branded a fake. Even shade becomes a dialect. Grey is for compliance, brown is for labour, blue is for access, white is for innocence, but only if it's pristine, which yours never is. Black is for grief, but only the rich are permitted to mourn in such costly dye. You start thinking in these restrictions. Once you wake from a nightmare where you entered the parlour in a crimson bodice and the room wailed. Not the guests. The room, the furniture, the walls, the candelabras, all screeching in objection. You bolt upright in your cot, pulse racing, hand clutching the rough edge of your apron like a lifeline. By now you've memorised every fastener and clasp in the house. You know which gowns have concealed rips, which gloves reek of old powder. You've repaired the same silk undergarment 5 times, never for yourself. And yet you still wonder, you imagine yourself in one of those gowns. Just once, just for a moment. The way the fabric might flow when you shift. The way people might step aside for you instead of past you. You wouldn't even talk. You'd just move silently, surely. But fantasies like that don't survive here, because in this house your clothing is your shackle, and every fibre murmurs, "Remember who you are, remember what you're not." They say the kitchen is the soul of the house. If that's accurate, then this one pulses like a battle drum. The first time you enter, you're struck by a barrier of aromas so dense it nearly knocks you backward. Roast, grease, dried spices, damp stone, scorched milk, blood. There's a cadence to it all. The clash of cookware, the snap of commands, the smack of dough, the sizzle of something boiling too quick and too fierce. And in the centre of it, like a commander at battle, stands the cook. She's massive, not just in build, but in authority. Her voice can freeze a footman cold at 10 strides. Her ladle serves as a tool. Her apron is marked with every taste from the last 10 years. They say she once cracked a noble's tooth with a peppermill after he criticised her mustard. Stand there, she tells you without glancing, and if you so much as twitch at the wrong second, I'll bake you into a pie. You trust her. You discover quickly that the kitchen operates by its own code. There's a pecking order within a pecking order, and it's maintained with absolute ruthlessness. The cook rules completely, but under her are tiers of devotees. The saucier, the spit boy, the pot girl, the grease lad, the herb cutter, and naturally the scullery horde. You're put on firewood and tallow duty. That means dragging logs, stoking the main hearth, and scraping the solidified fat from roasting pans. It's a rank just one step above rat-catcher, an actual position held by a boy named Hugh, whose sole job is to chase rodents with a copper spoon and a battle yell. But the risk isn't just vermin or scolds, it's the tempo. Everything moves too quickly. You're supposed to act without being instructed. Stir what needs attention. Grab what's missing. Decode half-formed orders yelled through curtains of steam and smoke. If you request clarity, you'll be called dense. If you hesitate too long, the dish is wrecked and you're standing along with it. And yet, this pandemonium has its own odd magnetism. There's a rawness to the kitchen. Unlike the upstairs where hush and precision dominate, down here people holler, perspire, curse and bleed. It's a place of vitality and rage, where things are formed, not just delivered. Feasts for 30 people materialize from this smoke-choked den, shaped by hands, scorched and scarred. You sear yourself twice on your first day. Once on a spit rod, once on a pot that seemed harmless, but wasn't. No one shows concern. Instead, the herb girl slaps a dock leaf onto your palm and continues chopping. But even within the chaos, there are silent agreements. The cook, for all her tempest, never forgets who's earned their wounds. She knows the name of every servant who's ever worked through. She recalls who dropped the pheasant in 1591, who overseasoned the mutton in 93, and most crucially, who stole her jar of saffron last winter. That person still isn't welcome in the kitchen. You discover that the kitchen isn't just a workspace, it's a war zone, a stage, a confessional. Secrets are shared in flowery alcoves, flirtations spark near the bread oven, and insults. Oh, the insults are hurled like scalding grease, inventive, vulgar, and often food-related. By your third week, you're fluent in kitchen profanity. By your fourth, you start employing them. Because in here, if you want to endure, you don't just lower your gaze, you keep your elbows sharp. The kitchen also has its ceremonies, ones not documented in any servant guide or steward's record. Every Sunday, before dawn breaks, the staff performs what they call the knife blessing. It's not spiritual, it's functional. You assemble around the butcher's block, and each blade, carving, boning, mincing, slicing, is handed down the row, cleaned and tapped 3 times on the wood. Once for keenness, the cook says, once for balance and once for quiet. You think it's absurd until you witness what a blunt knife does to a pheasant or to a finger, or worse, to the cook's temper. Then there's the law of the spoon wall, a line of over 30 wooden spoons mounted to a beam above the main table, each one belonging to a present or former servant. Some are etched with initials, others stained into permanent disguise. Each spoon has a tail, and no one handles another's unless they want their knuckles cracked. Your own spoon doesn't ascend until you've gained the cook's confidence. And confidence in this space is earned in injuries and victories. The day you save a tray of veal from tumbling into the ashes, she nods once and passes you a small weathered ladle. She's yours now. Don't lose her. You don't. Not even when your hands tremble from weariness. Not even when the flames surge too wild. But not everything in the kitchen is just swagger and fire. There's a curious gentleness in how the crew protects each other, especially in softer moments. You notice it when the herb girl adds extra rosemary into the stew on days when someone's mourning, or when the potboy hums a tune from his village and the others harmonise. Not boldly, just enough to hold the feeling. or the way someone always, without exception, leaves a piece of sweetened bread wrapped in fabric behind the flour sacks for the rat catcher who never requests and never acknowledges. One night, after a brutal supper shift where the roast burst, the soup separated and the custard refused to firm, you sit collapsed against the back door, too drained to loosen your apron. The cook walks by, pauses, sits next to you. She doesn't talk for a full minute, just breaks off a chunk of her bread, hands it wordlessly. You accept it. It's hard, but you don't mind. After a while, she says, "You're still too pristine. That's why they don't believe you." Yet you glance down. She's correct. Your apron may be creased, but it isn't charred. Your sleeves haven't been shredded. Your hands, while aching, don't have that grey, waxy coating the others wear like a medal. You comprehend. So the next day, you stop avoiding the grease. You start grabbing the hot handles without hesitating. You drop the cloth between you and the pan and welcome the burn. And later, when you reach to hang your spoon on the wall for the first time, you feel something unexpected rise in your chest. Not pride, not even acceptance. Just heat. The same heat the kitchen operates on. The same heat that tempers metal. The same heat that incinerates fear. And in that instant, you're not just a servant. You're part of the blaze. You've witnessed punishments before. Public rebukes, quiet downgrades, bread portions denied. But nothing readies you for the chair. It sits in the servants' courtyard under a twisted plum tree whose fruit always falls too soon. The chair is wooden, square-backed, with arms polished smooth by dread and splinters, keen from intentional carelessness. It isn't employed often. That's the most disturbing part, because when it is, everyone halts what they're doing. It occurs on a Tuesday. The chambermaid, a girl called Lettuce, too bold with her words, is hauled into the courtyard by the steward. She's not weeping. Not yet. Her apron is smeared with wax, her braid loosened. You catch that she giggled too audibly in the mistress's vicinity. Not at her, not even regarding her, just near her during a fitting. That's all it requires, the penalty. 2 hours in the chair, holding a mouse in her mouth. Not a living one, but still. Its tail droops limp from her lips, its fur moist with the steward's wine-dampened cloth. Let her savour. Silence, he announces. Everyone stares for a minute, just a minute. Then they pivot away because the rules are plain. Gaze too long and you're next. You don't pivot away. You watch Lettuce's eyes, livid, unblinking, as they challenge the rest of you to act like it's ordinary, as they declare, this is what occurs when you forget your rank. Later that evening, she comes back to the laundry room. She doesn't utter anything for the rest of the week, not a syllable. When you hand her a bucket, she nods. When you graze her elbow, she recoils. By the following month, she's moved to another estate, or so they claim. Punishments in this house arrive in all shapes, some noisy, some precise, some so delicate you don't grasp they're happening until it's finished. One girl is required to wear a red cord around her wrist for a week because she shattered a wine glass. Another is ordered to balance on one leg while cleaning the hallway for an entire afternoon. She drops twice. No one extends help. And then there's the bread penalty. A tradition. If you talk out of place, miss your curtsy, or step into a room without being summoned, you receive bread. Only bread for 3 days. No broth, no cheese, no ale, just a hard, frigid heel, morning, noon, and night. The bitter part. It's presented on a real plate, with a fork and knife, as if the ritual of eating somehow balances the deprivation. You're fortunate. So far, you've only been given to bucket work, washing chamber pots without gloves for a day after humming too clearly while folding linens. But Agnes says that's just the start. Punishment. Here isn't about suffering, she mentions one night, while trimming candle wicks. It's about being displayed in shame, making others glance away. That's what destroys you. You don't respond. You're too occupied staring at the scorch on your palm. The one from the kettle last week. The one you didn't mention. Because here's the truth. Sometimes pain is simpler to withstand than embarrassment. But the punishments aren't always delivered by the steward. Sometimes they originate from each other. The house operates on quiet grudges and murmured regulations. And if you violate one of those, especially the ones created by the servants themselves, you'll experience it long before the master ever learns of it. Take the pantry situation. A boy named Giles snatched a chunk of bread from the rear shelf. Not noble scraps, just crust from the staff's own ration. But he claimed more than his portion that violated unspoken contract. The next morning, his boots were missing. Not taken, just missing, swapped with mismatched clogs filled with ash. The following day, he discovered his apron drenched in chamber pot overflow. No one admitted. No one had to. By the end of the week, Giles requested to be moved to the stables. He never returned upstairs. Then there's the salt method, a penalty saved for those who spread rumours too freely. One girl revealed that the understeward had a weakness for the scullery maid. The next night, someone filled her sheets with raw salt. Her thighs blistered. No one mentioned it. Again you ask Agnes if the cook is aware of these punishments. Oh, she's aware. She says slicing turnips aware and accepts it so long as it doesn't interfere with supper shift. And if you assumed guests were exempt, reconsider. One visiting nobleman once seized a maid by the wrist a touch too firmly. That evening his lamb was unintentionally overspiced. He spent the entire night in the privy. The steward labelled it indigestion. The kitchen labelled it fairness. Even the house seems to join in. Doors jam, bells fail. Wash water turns foul. It's as if the structure itself recalls who merits discomfort. You question sometimes how long it would require for the house to punish you if you crossed a line. If you broke formation, you approach close. One night you converse too freely with the mistress's cousin, a gentle-voiced noble who seems intrigued about the workings of the house. She inquires about the bells. You respond too courteously, too distinctly. The housekeeper's eyes sharpen across the room. You spend the next 3 days given to stair monitoring. It's precisely what it sounds like. You sit on the second floor, landing from dawn to dusk, and document who ascends and who descends. You don't talk. You don't shift. Just observe, tally, and record. It sounds basic. It is not. After 12 hours, your back throbs. Your legs turn numb. You start to imagine footsteps. By the second day, no one meets your gaze. Not out of meanness, but sympathy. You're a symbol now. A warning. Don't get recognised. Don't elevate yourself. Don't breach invisible borders. By the 4th day, you're reassigned. Just like that. No clarification. But when you pass the housekeeper in the passage, she says, "There. Now you understand your position." Again you nod. Because punishment here isn't just anguish or work or starvation. It's separation. Being converted into something others don't want to acknowledge. And the most merciless part? It functions. You adapt quickly. Laughter is risky, not because it's banned exactly, but because it attracts notice. And in an Elizabethan household, notice is a privilege you can't manage. At first, you assume it's innocent. One morning, in the laundry room, someone shares a joke, something about the steward's wig, resembling a hedgehog in bereavement. You laugh. Just once, not audibly. Just a small breath through your nose. That's all it requires. The room goes silent. The girl next to you tenses. No one glances at you directly, but you sense the change. That subtle readjustment of invisible boundaries. By midday, your washing basin is loaded with cold water. Deliberately cold, not frozen, not icy, just wretched. Your knuckles throb every time you dip in. It's as if the basin retaliates. You don't laugh again for 3 days. The house doesn't prohibit happiness, it just reshapes it. Twisted smiles, stifled chuckles. The kind of laughter that's employed to endure, not rejoice. You start to identify the sanctioned forms of amusement. Ridicule, for instance, is always permitted, as long as it flows downward. A noble may laugh at a servant's awkward spill. A steward may chuckle at a chambermaid who stumbles on her hem. A cook may jest about the footboy's skinny arms. But should the joke ever travel upward, that's a danger. One afternoon the master tests on a new hat. Wide-brimmed, too tall, ridiculous. A visiting lady comments, "It looks suited for a goose." A wave of amusement moves through the hall. You smile, only a flicker at the corner of your mouth. But the mistress catches it. "Find something amusing," she says. You freeze. No correct answer exists. The footman next to you intervenes. She smiled at me. "My lady, I've something on my boot." The mistress scoffs, dismisses it. Later that evening you press a warm roll into the footman's hand. Without a word, you. He doesn't smile, just nods. Because here, laughter is currency. A transaction, a weapon, a defence, and sometimes it's a snare. The most chilling instance is the Feast of Fools trick. Once a year, around 12th night, the master permits a mock festival where servants may imitate the household's upper ranks. The cook wears the mistress's gown. The chambermaid sits at the high table. Laughter is promoted. It's supposed to be enjoyable. It is not enjoyable. It's an examination. You observe last year's fool, a spit boy who attempted to mimic the steward's rigid walk and nasal voice, laugh along with the others. Everyone applauds. The mistress smiles, the master bellows with laughter. But a week later, the boy is expelled for theft. No one ever specifies what he took. No one thinks he took anything. Agnes tells you quietly, the trick isn't to make them laugh. The trick is to see who loses their caution. You never volunteer for Feast of Fools. Instead, you learn to laugh inwardly, to preserve your humour for the laundry steam, the broom closet, the coals under the kitchen shelf. You exchange glances, you bump shoulders. You find pleasure in the way someone rearranges the rushes to spell crude words only the staff can detect. You do laugh, but cautiously. Because in this house, even happiness has a hierarchy. Still, the urge to laugh doesn't disappear. It transforms. It conceals. You start to notice the hidden comedy of the house, the small absurdities that only servants witness. The mistress's dog, for instance, has its own velvet cushion, yet prefers sleeping in the laundry basket. Or the guest who applies powdered beetroot to her cheeks, then smears it accidentally across a napkin and claims the cook served her spoiled jam. There's something hilarious about it all, but you mustn't laugh. Instead, the servants create code phrases. The pigeons are dancing means someone's wig has shifted. The moon is swollen means the master's breeches are too snug. It's juvenile, yes, but it keeps you rational. Then there's the craft of the silent prank, handed down like heirloom silver. A pinch of salt in the shoe of a cruel steward, a potato concealed in the mistress's harp case just enough to make it vibrate, a doll made of rolled rags positioned atop the bell rope so the first morning ring shrieks. None of it's vicious, just mischief. A kind of defiance no one dares confess out loud, because in a house governed by structure, absurdity becomes resistance. Even music becomes a form of laughter. There's a humming game the laundry girls conduct. Each contributes a note while folding sheets, but no one can duplicate a tune or laugh out loud. The one who cracks first gets given to starching, which is universally despised. It's juvenile, but somehow sacred. You also learn to interpret faces. A twitch at the corner of a mouth, a lifted brow, the slightest wink. Entire jokes are communicated across a room with nothing but looks. You once witnessed the undercook and potboy reenact a whole dispute between the master and mistress, using only cutlery and 2 carrots." The cook nearly choked, attempting to contain her laugh. But even in this, there are boundaries. One night, a visiting noble drops his wine goblet twice, then belches loudly. You don't laugh, you bite the inside of your cheek so forcefully it bleeds. The other maid beside you doesn't quite succeed. She snorts just once. The room freezes. The noble lifts an eyebrow. That evening she's reassigned to the dairy yard in January. The next day you visit her with a bit of cheese and a warm cloth. Her lips are blue. Her fingers won't quit shaking. "You ever laugh again?" she asks, teeth chattering. You don't answer, just sit beside her. Because in this house, laughter is like a loose floorboard. Step wrong and it creaks. Creak too loud and someone will notice. But even so, even with the risk, the fear, the silence, you keep laughing. Not because it's safe, but because it's yours. Because in a world where every bite, breath and blink is controlled, a single hidden chuckle is a rebellion, a secret crown, a reminder that somewhere deep beneath the starch and soot and endless rules, you're still alive. And nothing terrifies the house more than a servant who remembers how to smile. You've never encountered such rules around romance. Love isn't quite the word for it. What passes for wanting here is more like commerce, chance, something more fragile than China. You figure this out watching the kitchen boy get found murmuring to the chambermaid by the western steps. They weren't even holding hands, only talking soft. But somebody noticed. Somebody always notices. Before dark, the boy's out mucking stables, the girls shut in the linen closet all night. No meal, no light. The steward claims they were carrying on above their station. First time you catch that phrase, above their station. Not just wrong, threatening. Because inside these walls, even desire answers to hierarchy. You don't fall for somebody ranking higher. That looks like scheming. And you don't entertain anything with someone lower. That reads as self-deception. What's barely tolerated is something sideways, matching positions in tucked-away spaces under complete silence. You question Agnes one time, quiet-like. "Did you ever?" She gives a nod, keeps her face still. Lamp boy, gentle, fast with his hands, smiled through his eyes. "We'd talk maybe once weekly, never 2 weeks running. Then one evening, gone. You hold out for the rest. Sent off," she tells you. No explanation offered, no hearing, just vanished. That's when you start seeing the pattern. The careful looks, the changes in how people hold themselves. The serving spoon held too long over the pot, the bruised fruit passed palm to palm in the washing room. These become the servant's declarations. Wordless. Something you can eat. Something practical. But even keeping quiet won't keep you safe. One footman, tall, polished, favoured by the visiting crowd, takes a chance courting a lady's maid from elsewhere. He writes something down, presses wax on it, sends it through the page. Somehow the wrong person gets hold of it. What follows comes fast. They make him stand in the servants' hall and read it out loud. Every single line, the part included where he talks about her eyes, like moonlight, and pleads with her to leave come springtime. Everybody laughs. Not from cruelty, from terror, because laughing means they won't have to scream. Later, the steward adds another regulation. Nothing in writing changes hands without clearance. No poems, no tokens, no signs. You catch yourself burying your thoughts further down, carving little spaces inside your skull where hoping stays protected. Then, without warning, somebody notices you. Not just a glance your direction, but actually sees. The undercook. You've been working next to her for weeks now, hands keeping time together, hardly more than whispers traded. But one morning she wipes flour off your arm. Not quick, not by accident, but slow, on purpose. You go still. She holds your eyes maybe a second, then turns away. The world stays the same, but your lungs don't. You keep silent. She does too. Because in this place talking leaves tracks and wanting someone has to be invisible. Starting that day you begin watching her closer. The undercook rarely says much, but her movements tell stories. When she cuts bread, her fingers linger too long in the crust before she hands you the heel. When she works the stew, she positions the ladle just slightly toward you, like she's asking you nearer. You start wondering if it's actual or just decency. But decency alone is risky in this household. You think about what Agnes mentioned. Even fondness gets read as ambition if you slip. So you stay cautious. You pass your cider when nobody's watching. She gives you an apple polished till it shines. You exchange nothing that could leave evidence. No letters, no soft words, no meeting eyes when somebody else is present. Still, it gets seen. Because here, affection isn't measured by actions. It's measured by what others imagine you might do. The cook says nothing outright, but she starts putting the undercook on tasks farther from your spot. You go to morning prep, she goes to roasting. Your hours stop lining up. Your utensils hang on different walls now. Right then you get it. The household has made its decision. Even silent caring smells too much like defiance. You're not shocked. This place doesn't operate on wanting. It operates on obligation, on hierarchy, on what shows. The only passion that's acceptable points upward in loyalty, and even that needs discretion. Still, she manages to find you. You come across a clove tucked inside your apron fold. Another time, your bread crust carries the smallest spread of plum preserve. Preserve nobody else got that morning. Small gestures, practically invisible, but they heat you like kindling. One evening, after weather beats the shutters and rain drowns the washing, she comes upon you alone in the scullery, your wringing linens with fingers gone numb. She doesn't talk. She simply stands beside you, shoulder meeting shoulder, in the darkness. Your arms brush, and briefly you remember being human. Nobody enters, nobody witnesses. But the following day, your name disappears from the duty roster, just a smudge where it used to sit. Agnes won't meet your look. The steward moves you to the back storage rooms. Weeks' worth of dust, rodents, and quiet. Not officially discipline, but it's designed to teach you that emotions carry weight, and yearning counts as stealing, pulling focus from your role. You handle your days without protest. You push harder, speak less, nearly forget. Because even now, weeks gone by, you occasionally discover something left for you. A licorice piece folded into your sleeve, a cinnamon stick wedged between firewood logs. Always tiny, always something you could deny, but always exactly what you were needing. No signature, no explanation, only the silent assurance. I notice you. And somewhere love is banned, unseen and unmentioned, that could be the most courageous statement possible. You catch it well before you lay eyes on it. The pound of hooves, the clack of carriage wheels, the sharp call of the steward's command. Company has shown up. The feeling in the household shifts immediately. Everything tightens. Aprons get cinched harder. Shoes get buffed till they squeal. Even the candles look like they're burning taller. You stop mid-sweep in the lower passage, broom hanging in air, holding for instructions. They arrive quick and without looking at you. Cloth to the green bedroom. 4 towels, not 5. 5 appears too forward. Nothing with onion in the pot. Inspect the mirror in the guest washroom. Twice. Just like that, your day vanishes into hurried perfumes and plates never quite spotless enough. Because when company comes, your work triples and your presence halves. They shouldn't catch sight of you unless it's required. And even then, you need to appear helpful, deferential, and perfectly timed, like furniture with legs that happens to move. You get quick at reading visitor categories. There's the noisy one who throws down gloves expecting you to grab them without breaking stride. The interested one who requests your name, then loses it before you finish saying it. The unsafe one who holds a smile too long, who traps the washing girl near the steps, who calls you child though you're 22, but the absolute worst, the courteous one. They offer thanks, they show teeth, they wonder how you're managing, and briefly you lose yourself. You lower your walls. You reply with something like, "It's been quite a day, ma'am," and that fast, you've overstepped. You've given a full response. You've spoken too comfortably. You've created discomfort. Then comes the murmur. That maid is rather forward, wouldn't you say? You won't face punishment directly, but your name drops off the next banquet assignment. You're moved to chamber pot duty for 7 days. The lesson is, kindness doesn't undo the ladder. Guest fabrics are their own monster entirely. They need to be immaculate, not just clean, immaculate. You starch them so rigid they could stand alone. Folding them, you press each line with heated iron till your palms blister. You mist the edges with lavender and fold them in ways that don't hint at struggle, only effortless perfection. But sometimes the visitors bring their own help, out-of-town staff acting like nobility inside your walls. One sneers at what you're wearing on your feet. Another gripes that your soap carries a tallow smell. A travelling valet informs you your head covering sits crooked, then fixes it himself before you can move. You hold your tongue, you bend, you steady your grip, because when company arrives the regulations get tighter, errors get magnified, missteps multiplied, even humour needs rehearsal. The cook gives warning. If they knock over wine, you chuckle. If they mock the mistress, you act deaf. If they strike a dog, you offer to bring the stick. You don't wonder what happens if you refuse. You've witnessed the outcome. When evening finally drops, the household feels run completely dry. Floors gleam, fires rage, fruit glistens. The visitor relaxes, satisfied and entertained, never once thinking about the 45 pairs of hands that made it happen. And in the margins, you linger, still hushed, expendable. Because in this household a visitor is a tempest and you're the sandbag. But the hardest thing about company, they don't exit quickly. A meal becomes spending the night. Spending the night extends to 7 days. Suddenly, you're washing unfamiliar cloth, rewarming broths you didn't prepare, locating slippers for feet you never wanted to encounter. And with every passing hour, their requests get more peculiar. One woman demands her water approach boiling, but not quite reach it. Another insists the hearth in her room burn only cherry logs. Nothing else smells refined. One gentleman returns his dessert claiming it's too even in shape. Yet they receive praise. Praised for their cultivation, their exacting preferences. Nobody faults them for exhausting half the staff. Your task is adapting, serving with an expression that doesn't crack and a bow that doesn't droop. Meanwhile, your own patterns fall to pieces. Your laundry waits because the basins hold guest garments. Your bread portion shrinks because the mistress ordered extra pastries. You're reprimanded for your dirty apron, but nobody mentions you've been labouring 12 hours without changing. The household bends for the visitor, and when it fractures, you absorb the blame. Then there's the talk. Visitors always carry it. Hints of impropriety, courtly intrigue, hidden pregnancies, royal preferences. The mistress absorbs it with bright eyes, cooling herself in pleasure. You absorb it too, but from the other side of the door, through cracks, while filling glasses. You catch too much, like when a visitor exposed the master's obligations. How the property is mortgaged 3 times deep. Or when another boasted about spotting the steward in public punishment a decade back for inappropriate attachment. You store these fragments away, not for advantage, not from spite, but for defence. Because in this household, information is the only shield you're given. And when visitors stir trouble, it's the staff who suffer burns. Still, not every visitor brings cruelty. Some just bring obliviousness. A young writer stayed one evening, pale, delicate, and prone to reciting Virgil while pacing the grounds. He abandoned a glove on the study seat. You located it, brought it back. He observed you like you were constructed from starlight. Do you compose verse? He wondered. You blinked. No, you answered. He showed teeth. You ought to. Then morning came, and he was gone. Left nothing except faint traces of ink and spice. Briefly you'd felt acknowledged, not as help, not as shadow, but as something possessing thought, possessing capability. You didn't mention it to anyone, not even Agnes, because what would be gained? When the next visitor showed up, an earl breathing like spoiled dairy, you were back polishing silverware, scrubbing marks, and reminding yourself not to exhale too obviously when he addressed you as girl. When he finally departed, the entire staff released breath together. The cook wept against a flour sack. The steward appeared a decade more aged. The mistress naturally remarked how tranquil everything feels now. But do inform my cousin I'm expecting more company before Sunday ends. And so it starts over, because in this household you don't entertain visitors, you endure them. You've caught wind of wages, coins in pouches, gold moving hand to hand, silver clinking in containers. But here that's mythology. You're compensated in bread, not figuratively, not as metaphor, actually. Every Thursday evening the steward distributes the weekly portion from a timber crate beside the pantry. Half a loaf of rough rye per servant, cut with more dust than grain, hard enough to dent wood if you drop it. There's no ritual, no metal, and absolutely no bargaining. You form a line like animals. When you reach the front, he doesn't lift his eyes, just passes it across, speaking your name without inflection. You acknowledge, step aside, and try not appearing let down. Because disappointment implies expectations, and expectations, that's nearly criminal. The bread gets divided by position. The lady's attendant receives a whole loaf baked with seeds. The cooking staff gets theirs heated. You, corridor cleaner, receive the leftover corner batch, edges and fragments arranged to seem complete. Still you preserve it. You never discard any. You portion it across 7 days, 1 bite with soup, 1 with ale, 1 taken past midnight when the chill gets too sharp for sleeping. You even figure out toasting it on the hearth tool. If you're fast, and nobody's observing. Some older servants get inventive. They trade their shares. A laundry worker might exchange her entire loaf for a finger of beef fat. The undercook sometimes swaps for plants, wool, cord, or half a cooked egg. You once watched Will trade his full ration for 2 matches and confidential information. You don't know what the information contained, but afterward he carried himself taller. If you misbehave, your bread gets reduced. Not merely lessened, substituted. Instead of your half loaf, you're given what they call the pale roll, a compact, flourless mass tasting of mould and recollection. Even the rodents won't touch it. You consume it regardless. You've got no alternative. And if you're discovered stealing a bite of another's, you're turned in, not openly though. The betrayal occurs in whispers. A loaf vanishes, a name surfaces, and suddenly you're assigned firework. 7 days in the smoke chamber, blackening your chest while scraping soot from stone with damp cloth. You adapt quickly. Bread is everything. It's your currency, your measurement, your proof of compliance. You even begin dreaming about it. Heavy slices covered in butter, hot loaves pulled apart like treasure. Dreams where the steward hands you double portions instead of single, grins and uses your name like you're not invisible. You wake starving every time. Once during a celebration the mistress permits a luxury, sweet rolls drizzled with honey. Every servant receives one. You cradle yours like something sacred. You consume it slowly, particle by particle, holding the flavour in your mouth. You wrap what remains in fabric and tuck it beneath your sleeping mat just to know it exists. Agnes spots you, doesn't scold, just nods. We all manage it, she tells you. Some of us consume it. Others simply keep it close. Evidence we mattered that week, because in this household bread isn't merely nourishment, it's authorization to be. But bread isn't the sole payment, just the most obvious. The household compensates in candles, cleaning agents, cloths and leniency. If you deliver well, if you shine the silver without streaks or press the linens without wrinkles, you might earn an additional candle stub, possibly even a slice of lye soap that hasn't turned soft from repeated use. Once, following an especially brutal visitor period, you're given half a bar of rose soap. It's been used certainly, but only lightly. The fragrance holds. You hold it like something precious, because here soap represents dignity. The opportunity to wash away the smoke, the odour, the layers of someone else's labour clinging to your flesh. It means not carrying the smell of work when you move through passages. It means being able to stop thinking for 3 minutes that you're an implement. Then there are fabric remnants. When the lady's dresses are retired, they get cut down, not for her reuse naturally, but by the seamstress and senior attendants. What's left gets deemed servant appropriate. Trim, lining, maybe half a foot of velvet. You once received a strip of blue wool with the hem still attached. You fashioned it into a pouch. Not for coins. You don't possess coins, but to contain your lace needle, a button, a ribbon thread salvaged from refuse. And there exists one more currency, the scarcest, the most precious. Time. If you deliver beyond what's expected. If you complete an entire month without complaint, sometimes, just sometimes, you're granted an hour. An hour away. Not a complete day, not even half. Just 60 minutes. But it feels eternal. You're permitted to exit through the rear gate and follow the orchard trail. You can rest beneath the crumbling stone arch by the sheep pasture. You can observe the sky, truly observe, without anyone shouting your name or questioning why your hands aren't occupied. You never lose your first hour. You spend the opening 20 minutes certain it's a trap, that someone's monitoring, that the steward will emerge from the bushes demanding to know why you're unoccupied. But nobody appears. You lift a stone, trace your thumb along its face. You stretch on your spine and attempt remembering your mother's voice or your brother's laughter or what it felt like to eat without needing permission. You come back before the hour finishes. Everyone does, because while the household grants time, it also monitors what you accomplish with it. Later that evening, Agnes sees your face flushed, quiet, strangely peaceful, and remarks you're lighter. You agree, that hour didn't merely rest your frame, it proved you're still a person. Beneath the aprons, the wounds, the curved back, there's still somebody inside, somebody worth more than crusts. But naturally the moment dissolves. By morning you're back cutting the charred edge off old loaves and acting like they're new. The steward loses your name again. The mistress complains the soap smells ordinary, but you tuck the memory of that hour into your thoughts, like a warm stone in a winter coat. Something to heat you later when the days turn grey, when the bread runs thin, when you question if you'll ever count. Because in this household wages come and vanish. But a moment of peace, that remains. It begins with coughing. Not yours, his. The master's voice carries from beyond the library entrance, coarse and scraping. A second cough, a gap, then a third. You freeze where you're positioned holding a feather duster, halfway through cleaning a collection of brass holders. You weren't supposed to be this near the study. You weren't supposed to hear. But once you do, you can't reverse it. He's sick, or concealing something, or both. And from that instant forward, you start observing more. The mistress's handkerchief suddenly soaked in something darker than makeup. The cook's instructions, less meat, more liquid. The steward's manner tense, sharp, hoarding quiet like metal. Then you witness it. A letter just briefly gripped in the steward's fingers, the seal cracked, the wax smudged. You catch only 4 words before he conceals it. Due in 10 days. You weren't meant to witness that. And that's the most threatening aspect of labouring in this household. You witness things, you catch things, you discover too much. Initially it's accidental. A name breathed during a fitting, a record book left exposed, the way the master recoils when particular visitors get mentioned. You sweep a chamber and locate a pin that doesn't belong to the mistress. You fold an undergarment with a tear in the incorrect spot. You catch the chambermaid weeping by the servant's stairs, whispering the name of someone who hasn't been observed in months. You don't seek knowing, but now you know, and knowing weighs heavy, heavier than any pail. Heavier than a washing pot, heavier than bread shares and rigid collars and constant bowing. Because when you know things, you become dangerous. One evening you walk past the steward's office and catch your name spoken. Soft, clipped, like something delicate about to snap. The entrance closes too fast. The voice is cut too abruptly. You weren't in difficulty, not directly, but now you're being monitored. Your assignments are altered. You're moved to night cleaning, reduced contact with the family. You no longer work in the upper passages. You're informed it's just rotation. You recognize what it actually is. So you grow quieter. You move more carefully. You question less. You stop looking interested. You shape your face into a sort of pleasant vacancy. The sort that communicates, "I witnessed nothing." Agnes observes. Careful, she tells you. You're drifting near the boundary. You question what that means. She doesn't respond. She simply touches your hand and mentions you've lasted longer than most. The following day you find her in the garden with the washing. She speaks nothing. You speak nothing, but when you turn to go, she presses a folded piece of parchment into your palm. No wax, no marking, just one sentence. There adores even the master dreads. You burn it in the kitchen fire that evening, not because someone instructed you, because you finally understood. In this household, the heaviest burden isn't labour. It's what you're never supposed to hold. You begin transforming, not in looks. Your apron still shows patches. Your fingers still ache, but in how you travel through the household. Softer, quieter, less questioning. You step where the boards don't groan. You time your movements so you never collide with anyone significant. You become backdrop because now you understand how narrow the line is between observer and danger. And you're not isolated. You observe others carrying secrets like invisible loads on their spines. The chambermaid who used to hum but now stays silent. The potboy who jerks whenever the master passes. Even Agnes, who once barked instructions like a commander, now seems to weigh her words like currency. Everyone knows something. Everyone fears being the next to disappear. Once, in the early hours of a rain-soaked morning, you overhear the cook muttering beneath her breath, listing the names of servants no longer present. Some departed quietly, others disappeared without warning. One supposedly found better employment, though her shoes remained beneath the cot. The shoes stayed. She didn't. You ask nothing. One evening, while carrying water to the attic chambers, you pass by the green entrance again. It's still shut, still soundless. But now there's a marking above the frame. A thumbprint in ash. Recent. You stare at it too long. The next day, the housekeeper assigns you to outside tasks. Collecting herbs, purchasing soap, walking to the town edge for salted fish. It feels like banishment, but also preservation. You don't protest. You walk. And beyond the gates the air tastes altered, lighter, wetter, unrestricted. But you don't fit out there anymore. You realise this when you pass a man in the village centre and he questions what you're selling. You stumble over words. You're not selling anything. You're just transporting secrets folded into your apron like pressed notes. So you return, because you have to. Because regardless of how threatening the household feels, the world beyond doesn't recognise you anymore. Inside, you play the game better than before. You discover how to lower your gaze 2 seconds before someone observes you. You speak in half-breaths. You never question the locked cabinet in the study or why the mistress receives letters that get burned without being read. But you absorb. And the more you absorb, the more you realise the household is a prison not just for you, but for them. The master paces like prey. The mistress weeps behind her fan. The steward's hand shakes when he counts the silver. They aren't free either. The distinction is you know you're not. They still act otherwise. One night the undercook slips you a folded scrap of linen. No words, just an impression of a key. Small, delicate, marked in soot. You say nothing, but you carry it in your apron for days, letting it warm against your side. Letting it remind you. The walls might be tall, the doors locked, but nothing remains concealed forever. And in a household where secrets are as common as bread, the ones who last longest aren't the ones who speak them, but the ones who never have to. You've discovered how to eat quietly, how to weep without noise, how to smile using only your eyes. But you haven't yet discovered how to sleep in this household. Not properly, because here even resting follows regulations. You're placed in the upper east garret, a long narrow chamber beneath the angled roof where the wind screams through the beams like it's attempting to communicate something. The area is divided with 6 others. There are no real beds, just tick mattresses packed with straw, each thin as a folded coat and only marginally softer. Your sleeping position is third from the left beside the fractured window that never fully shuts. You jam a rag in the gap to stop the draft. It doesn't work. Your pillow is your apron. Your blanket is shared one between two. The girl next to you snores gently unless she's weeping. There are regulations. Countless regulations. You're forbidden from sleeping with your face toward the glass. That privilege belongs to senior personnel. You're not permitted to rest on your spine. That comfort is reserved for those who've proven themselves. You mustn't vocalize your dreams. Speaking while unconscious leads to relocation. Nobody risks hearing what should have remained unknown. Even breathing too loudly gets monitored. A child once rattled through the darkness. The following morning, he found himself stationed at timepiece duty, positioned near the food storage bell, manually tracking seconds. All day, nothing to eat, no respite, simply observing the hand sweep past like condemnation. You attempt rest regardless, but the minutes are brief and splintered. You stand before the chimes sound. You collapse long past the cooking flame's death. And still, your rest is delicate, like tissue across an open fire. Every noise startles you awake. The moan of plumbing, the whistle of air currents, the muffled weeping of the young woman opposite who still imagines her sibling claimed by the ocean. You receive one stretch of 5 hours. Weekly, if fortune favours you. The remainder, borrowed moments. You discover how to drift while remaining vertical. You rehearse shutting your lids while your fingers continue moving. You perfect the technique of partial slumber, sufficient to offer your mind a hint of recovery, never adequate to drift too distant. Privacy doesn't exist here. Each night becomes collective territory, collective respiration, collective weight. When one person shifts, everyone senses it. When one person trembles, the covering moves. When one person murmurs unconsciously, he's returning soon. She stole the brush. I had no intention. You act as though you heard nothing. Because within these walls, rest isn't guaranteed. It's earned. And it can vanish. One young woman, a copper-haired attendant named M, once failed to wake for the morning meal bell. Only once. She insists she was experiencing a melody. The manager discovered her tucked beneath her covering at dawn. She never opened her lids before he hurled the water basin. Now she rests sitting upright, never closes both lids simultaneously. Her joy disappeared the following day. And yet, through the chill, through the regulations, there exists one peculiar solace. The cadence, the awareness that everyone shares your exhaustion, that even the harsh ones snore, that even the reserved ones spasm in slumber, that regardless of your position or responsibility or consequence, you all share the identical dark ceiling even when you cannot rest below it. Rest arrives in fragments now. You cease anticipating visions. You cease wishing to feel recovered. What you desire instead is suspension, simply a few stolen moments where your frame forgets its pain and your reflections dissolve before reaching your core. But even these moments are measured. The attic grows icier as the darkness stretches longer. One morning you wake with ice crystals on your covering indoors. Agnes names it fireplace frost. The flames don't extend this high up. Some nights the exhalation of 6 servants rises together, climbing to the wooden beams like vapour signals, though nobody will witness them. And then arrive the midnight summons. You're informed about them, cautioned even, but they still surprise you. It begins with a chime, distant and low. Then the supervisor's voice. Rouse the candles, that indicates you. You stumble from your cot in darkness, searching for your apron already partially through the entrance. The hour doesn't matter. When the owner summons, you stand. When the lady mourns, you retrieve her wrap. When the visitors desire heated milk at midnight, you warm it. When the infant upstairs falls ill, though nobody acknowledges there's an infant, you transport embers to the wet nurse and pretend you observed nothing. You return to bed, trembling. You don't rest, merely remain there, listening to the others inhale. all of you suspended at consciousness's boundary like it's a precipice too sharp to descend from. Then arrive the visions, or, more accurately, the bodily recollections. Instances your frame recalls even when your consciousness doesn't. You wake with your limbs curved as though bearing firewood. Your spine convulses like you're still scrubbing stone. Once you rise in your unconsciousness and begin creasing your covering like it's pressed fabric. The others observe but remain silent because everyone's experienced it. Everyone's fingers twitch nightly, recreating the movements of the previous day. It's as though the structure conditions your muscles. Even during rest, the cot doesn't release you, it reshapes you, renders you more effective for tomorrow. And the murmurs. Sometimes you detect things not from the attic, from beneath. The collision of cutlery, the silence of movement where none should exist. Once a young voice, another instance, the sound of restless walking. Always quiet enough that you question it. Always unusual enough that you don't acknowledge it. Agnes claims the structure preserves sound, that the barriers recall, that when conditions align perfectly, you'll detect reverberations from decades past. Disputes, cradle songs, departing words. You don't inquire, you simply draw the covering higher. On the uncommon occasion, you're granted an additional hour following a celebration day or a visitor's exit. You feel like a spectre hovering in your own cot. The others have already departed to responsibilities. The chamber is silent, the floor still retains warmth from all those unshod feet. You recline, allow your lids to close gently, and for once, the structure is motionless. You envision not labour or responsibility or even liberation, but absolute absence, just darkness and warmth and suspension. It concludes too quickly, naturally. The chime sounds again, but for one brief hour you recalled what it signified to recover, and within these walls that's nearly equivalent to independence. There are instances when the structure seems to respire, not symbolically actually. The timber shifts with a prolonged, gradual moan, like organs exhaling. The barriers constrict in moisture, then release as they dehydrate. The floor planks crack without footfalls. The aged fireplace in the corridor wheezes like it preserves every tale ever shared before it. You begin questioning if the structure comprehends who serves it, who complies, who defies, and more significantly, who doesn't belong. Because every structure has its regulations. But this one, it has preferences. Consider the staircases, for instance. There are 3 front, visitor and servant. You've never placed foot on the front ones. Nobody attempts. The visitor stairs are confined but gleaming, the servant stairs eroded to a depression from generations of silent feet. But recently they groan louder for some than others. For you, always one groan. 5th step from the summit, regardless how delicately you step. But for Agnes, soundless. You once observed her descending in the darkness without disturbing the cook. You attempted the identical approach. The step moaned like a perishing animal. Agnes glanced back at you and lifted her shoulders. The structure resists deception. You found it amusing then. But the longer you inhabit here, the less you find amusing. Because it's not merely the stairs, it's the fasteners that resist for one individual and glide smoothly for another. The frigid areas in the passage that never seem to affect the manager. The way flames in the upper corridor extinguish if you vocalize too loudly. But only when you do. Certain chambers feel weightier than others, like the emerald receiving room, which carries a subtle scent of purple flowers and writing fluid. You're not stationed there anymore. After unintentionally overturning the writing fluid container, the mark never disappeared. The owner never regarded you again. Agnes claims the chamber selected someone else. You'd assume she was deranged, except the chamber did feel transformed, icier afterward, like it had rejected you. There are locations in the structure where your hair raises before a tempest. Not from air currents, but from something else. Not malevolent, not precisely. Simply observant, as if the construction itself is verifying your bearing, your silence, your allegiance. And the structure recalls. It recalls who neglects to bend at the entrance frame. It recalls who trails in soil. It recalls who deceives. One child was discovered taking preserves from the food storage. He was youthful, starving, shaking. Everyone assumed he'd be struck or expelled, but instead the supervisor simply grinned and relocated him to the underground archives. Nobody ever informed him what he was to catalogue. He descended after the evening meal, returned before sunrise, vision, crimson, mouth sealed, never took preserves again, never vocalised above a murmur. Eventually he was transferred to the animal quarters. Agnes only stated the structure instructed him. You question what it instructs you. Some days you feel sheltered. An entrance that should crash closes softly. Instead, a current lifts your hair precisely before the flame burns too diminished. Once you nearly released the metal tray, but the floor covering caught your foot precisely in time. Other days you question if it's manipulating you, like the instance your footwear disappeared for a complete day, then materialized perfectly shined on your bedding. Or when the summon chime rang for the western corridor, but nobody had been stationed there for months. You proceeded regardless because you must, because the structure was summoning. The western corridor is perpetually cold. You proceed cautiously, grasping the border of your apron, attempting not to allow the silence compressed too firmly against your hearing. This section of the structure hasn't been utilized in weeks. No visitors, no attendants positioned here, no lady parading in fabrics. The wall hangings are dust-covered and the light holders haven't contained fresh flames in longer than you've served here, and yet the summon chime definitely rang. From here you approach the entrance. Wood, rural, carved, fractured down the middle like a divided tooth. You pause, then tap once, merely in case. Of what? You're uncertain. Perhaps of discovering someone, perhaps of being mistaken. The grip rotates before you contact it. The entrance swings open a finger's breadth, like an exhalation being released. You proceed inside. The chamber beyond carries scents of parchment and tallow. Not decay, not fungus, just aged contemplation. Storage lines the barriers, stacked with volumes whose labels you cannot decipher. There's a composition desk near the opening and a solitary chair rotated partially away, as though someone recently stood and neglected to return. Nobody's present. But the flame is ignited, still wavering. Your inhalation halts. You were informed this section was sealed for maintenance, that the floor planks were deteriorating, that the ceiling material above had collapsed inward. But the chamber appears pristine, not maintained, untouched, and that's when you observe it. The record book. It's accessible. The fluid is still drying. You incline forward. The parchment carries a subtle scent of spices. It's a designation you recognize, yours, inscribed in the precise looping script of the manager. Adjacent to it dates your entrance, your responsibilities, your rotation schedule. And then vacant territory, a new line anticipating. Anticipating what? You detect a noise behind you, you spin around. Nothing. But the entrance has sealed. You're not confined, but the message is evident. You weren't intended to examine this. You retreat. Your footwear doesn't produce a sound. The flame diminishes. You don't extinguish it. It expires independently. As if acknowledging the conclusion of your inquisitiveness, you depart quietly. When you return to your passage, Agnes is anticipating. She states nothing, merely hands you a creased note. It displays the structure never neglects who investigates. The following day, your responsibilities shift. You're no longer stationed to maintain the upper openings. You're dispatched instead to organise fabrics deep in the rear storage, below stairs, beyond observation. You've been relocated but not disciplined. Not yet. Because the structure doesn't retaliate like an owner. It redirects, it observes, it modifies. And if you discover to listen carefully enough to the gentle sealing of entrances, the silence of gliding feet, the exhalation of pressure behind barriers, you begin comprehending. The structure isn't merely construction. It's recollection, it's assessment, it's regulation. You're no longer merely a servant. You're within it now, one more strand in its grand woven silence. And you question, quietly and only to yourself, how many strands it has drawn before you, how many it will draw afterward. Because the chime in the western corridor still functions, because the fluid in the record book is never dry, because the structure is perpetually observing. You assumed you'd mastered the structure's cadence, but now the cadence transforms. It commences with something minor, a fresh servant. Nobody informs you her designation. She simply materializes one morning, positioned rigidly beside the washing attendant, wearing footwear that are excessively pristine and a head covering drawn excessively low. She's youthful, perhaps 14, but conducts herself like someone feigning not to be frightened. You're stationed to demonstrate her the fabric storage, but before you approach the entrance, she states softly, "I comprehend the route." And somehow she does. She navigates through the corridors like she's committed them to memory, already comprehends which entrances to press with her joint, which steps to circumvent. She even comprehends to lower before passing beneath the diminished beam near the storage, the one that nearly displaced your forward tooth, your initial week. You're about to inquire who instructed her when Agnes grasps your limb that evening. She wasn't instructed, she states flatly. She was dispatched. Dispatched by whom? Agnes doesn't state. She simply compresses her mouth tightly and continues walking. The following few days feel incorrect. The chimes ring at peculiar hours. The manager misses his customary beverage, which has never occurred before, and in the attic, the flame by your cot burns lower than customary, though you're certain you ignited it completely. The fresh young woman, still unidentified, never consumes with the remainder. She accepts her meal independently, provided directly from the cooking area without a word. You notice the cook never encounters her vision, and she's perpetually observing from corners, from stairwells, from behind the delicate curtains of the upper passageway. You sense her observation before you observe her, like electricity, like something in the barriers attempting to compress through. Agnes confirms your suspicion. One night, while buffing metal, they've dispatched an inspector. You respond nervously. Inspector for what? Agnes doesn't respond immediately, merely buffs in gradual circles, then for frailty, for defiance, for fissures. You assume its absurdity until you wake with your apron absent. It's a minor thing, but the structure notices you're delayed to your initial responsibility. The manager scowls, the cook contracts her vision, the sequence of confidence begins to loosen. By afternoon, your designation is relocated to the crimson column in the record book. That's not discipline, but it's not commendation either. Crimson signifies observe again. And the fresh young woman? She's already in the azure. Azure is uncommon. Only Agnes, the manager, and 2 others maintain azure status. It signifies trusted. It signifies invisible. It signifies the structure welcomes you. You're still on trial. You comprehend now that the structure has 2 collections of regulations. The documented ones about bending and cutlery and cleaning fabrics, and the undocumented ones about allegiance, silence, and survival. And it's the undocumented ones that matter more, because in the structure's perception, silence isn't merely valuable, it's holy. Those who vocalize excessively fade, those who inquire are relocated, and those who vocalize aloud of what they've observed in the western corridor, they disappear from the record book. Nobody states the word terminated. They simply don't appear. One morning, cots are remade, designations are eliminated, and the chime rings on indifferent. You begin comprehending. The structure resists disruption. It flourishes on smoothness, repetition, quietness. And the fresh young woman? She's not a servant. She's the structure's reflection. You cease naming her the fresh young woman. Not permitted. Naturally, you don't name her anything. Nobody does. But in your consciousness, she becomes something else. The reflection, like Agnes stated, because she reflects the structure's regulations better than any individual you've ever encountered, so flawless in bearing, in silence, in timing. It's as though the structure formed her from darkness and respiration. She doesn't vocalize, but she's perpetually present when something occurs. A washing attendant burns her hand. The reflection is already positioned in the corner, observing. The attendant stumbles, bearing a tray. She rotates her head sufficiently to observe it, and the following morning he's relocated to the garden, beyond observation. The secondary cook miscalculates the portions. A crimson line materializes in the record book by his designation. No discussion, no caution. And you. You begin sensing transparent, not invisible, observed through, like you're constructed of crystal, and the structure is examining something beyond you, through you, determining whether you're worth preserving. Your responsibilities become more demanding. You discover notes concealed into fabric creases. Repress this, or excessive stiffening. No signature, no fluid, merely subtle pencil marks, like someone inscribed them from recollection and didn't wish to compress too firmly. One night you wake to discover your footwear buffed and positioned at the base of your cot. You didn't buff them. Agnes notices. Her voice is a murmur over the noise of the upper window. They're examining your patterns. You inquire what occurs if you fail. Agnes merely states the identical thing that occurs to barriers with fissures. That's when you begin transforming. You commence creasing napkins the manner the manager prefers, even if nobody requests. You buff metal in locations not on your schedule. You proceed aside a portion sooner when a superior servant passes. You acknowledge before being addressed to grin without displaying teeth. And the reflection? She observes you discover her once by the record room entrance, positioned motionless in the flame light, not examining, merely listening to the scratch of the manager's writing instrument. She rotates before you can proceed away. No words, merely a prolonged observation. You don't shift. You don't flicker. You correspond her silence with your own. She acknowledges once, scarcely, then disappears into the dark corridor. The following morning, your designation shifts back to dark fluid. Neutral, not commended, but no longer a caution, and concealed beneath your morning bowl is a creased note. One word. Persist. No designation, no mark. But the parchment carries a subtle scent of spices like the record book in the western section. You comprehend now. The structure doesn't compensate compliance. It compensates modification. It desires servants who don't merely follow regulations, but become them, who comprehend that survival isn't about strength or charm or even velocity. It's about motionlessness, accuracy, arrangement. You're no longer a visitor in this structure. You're becoming section of its mechanism, and you comprehend with a peculiar combination of pride and terror that one day, if you're quiet enough, flawless enough, valuable enough, you too might disappear from the crimson and dark fluid of the record book and enter the azure, the shade of confidence, the shade of silence, the shade of the structure itself. It's tempestuous outside, not merely a drizzle or a polite tapping against the shutters, but a complete Victorian thunderstorm, the kind that renders the beams groan and the drainage overflow. Precipitation lashes against the leaded openings, like it's attempting to enter inside, and the electrical discharge is so brilliant it transforms the passage white for entire moments at a time. But you don't recoil. You're positioned in the emerald receiving room, the one that once rejected you recall. The one with the fluid mark and the scent of purple flowers. Now you're here again, summoned by the manager with no explanation, only emotion. He handed you a fabric and a solitary instruction. Buff the opening fasteners. Not the glass, not the edges, the fasteners. So here you are, on your joints, moist fabric in hand, rubbing gradual circles into the frigid metal of an opening nobody accesses. You comprehend better than to inquire why. That was weeks past. Now you comprehend. Because buffing isn't about cleanliness. It's about existence. The structure examines you, not with responsibilities, but with instances like this. Peculiar, silent, mundane. If you hesitate, if you inquire, if you produce a facial expression, someone notices. And the reflection. She passes the entrance way behind you, silent as a respiration. She doesn't halt, doesn't acknowledge. But you sense the air shift with her passing, like the structure inhaled. You buff faster. A tempest outside wails, and suddenly the opening trembles under your fingers. Not from air current, from opposition. The fastener wriggles, the metal jerks. The entire thing shifts. You withdraw, and then absence. It's motionless. Was it the air current? You examine at the crystal, and for an instant, merely one heartbeat, you observe a reflection that isn't yours. It's wearing your uniform, it's holding your fabric, but it isn't you. It stares back with a face flawlessly motionless. Not angry, not sorrowful, merely observing you flicker. It's vanished. The fastener is warm now, the fabric moist. You continue buffing. Later that evening at the meal, the reflection young woman is vanished. Nobody states anything. Her designation was never inscribed. No stations materialize for her. Her cot is flawlessly made, corners concealed. Her footwear are vanished. The record book displays no modifications. But there's a note in your apron compartment. Azure. Merely that and a second word beneath it. Remain. You're uncertain who departed it. The handwriting isn't the manager's. It's rounder, more gradual, feminine. Agnes observes it, states nothing, only raises an eyebrow, because you comprehend what it signifies now. You've been accepted, not elevated, not commended, but absorbed. You're not the identical servant who entered grasping stiffening, rigid sleeves and stumbling over the rear stairs. You've mastered the structure's cadence, its mysteries, its preferences. You comprehend which corridors reverberate, which entrances complain, which cots conceal more than fabric. You comprehend that sometimes you're not solitary in the chamber, even if nobody else is present. And the record book. It now contains your designation in fluid so profound it appears nearly azure, dark, like darkness, like tempest vapour, like silence. The following day something transforms. You're no longer stationed to cutlery or fabrics or chime response. Instead, your schedule simply displays structure detail, no additional explanation, no chart, merely that you comprehend it as a kind of completion. Agnes offers you an acknowledgement as you pass her by the storage, not affectionate, not cautionary, from recognition. You've become what few do in a household this extensive, not a servant but an extension. You now hover between responsibilities, refill a flame without being requested, secure a loose connector before it squeaks. You remove flame drips before they cool. You comprehend who to circumvent. And when? You've become section of the apparatus, lubricated and silent. And in your silence, you detect things. You begin noticing a subtle rustle when the manager seals the record book, like pages settling into position, but more gradual, deliberate. You capture the cooking area timepiece ticking beyond synchronization. At midnight precisely, you detect the stair groan in threes, even when nobody ascends it. You're not solitary in your service. The structure isn't merely observed, it observes itself. One night, while extinguishing passageway lamps, you discover an entrance you've never observed before. It's concealed behind a curtain you perpetually assumed led to bare stone barrier. But tonight the curtain is drawn slightly, like a signal. The entrance is confined, painted the precise shade of darkness. You attempt the grip. It accesses without sound. Inside is a chamber filled with uniforms, not garments, genuine servant uniforms. dozens, perhaps hundreds, all arranged by age and manner, some threadbare, some elegant, all marked with tiny labels bearing dates. You run your finger along. 1592, another 1607, another 1554, but that would signify these are not reserves. These are records. The structure recalls not merely designations, it recalls bodies, strands it has worn before, and suspended near the rear is your uniform, not a duplicate yours. The identical mended border, the identical tear you patched following that washing area slip. But how did it arrive here? You never removed it. You proceed back and discover a reflection behind you. Not the young woman, a genuine one. Tall, oval, the kind nobles utilize for vanity. But you don't observe yourself in it. You observe the structure, not its chambers, not its bricks. You observe its form, the form it constructs with its individuals, its regulations, its determinations, its recollection. A respiring organism of responsibility and cadence and observing. And then the reflection flickers and you observe yourself in azure. No facial expression, merely present. You exit the chamber and seal the entrance gently behind you. Later, back in the attic, your lamp won't ignite. You don't attempt again. You merely recline in cot, facing the ceiling, listening to the ticking timepiece slip beyond rhythm. Because now you comprehend. The structure doesn't desire gratitude or allegiance. It desires you to become it, and you already have. The structure is quiet now. No more chimes, no more footfalls on the stair, no murmured instructions slipping through the fissures. Merely motionlessness. You recline back in your confined cot, the covering drawn up to your jaw, your hands creased precisely right. The flames vanished cold. The passageway beyond your entrance is wrapped in fabric darkness. You comprehend the routine. When to inhale, when to flicker, when to simply listen. And outside, the tempest has passed. The precipitation is only a silence now, tapping gently against the opening crystal, like a recollection attempting to discover its route back in. You're secure here. Not because the structure shelters you, but because you've mastered how to exist inside it without opposing. You've become fluent in its regulations, its pauses, its silences. You've joined something larger than yourself. A quiet cadence passed from one hand to the following, through centuries of footfalls, creased fabric, and designations inscribed in fading fluid. You might not recall when the structure became yours, but tonight, as your vision grows weightier, you comprehend this much. You're not lost. You've simply become section of the narrative, a strand woven in among many, unseen but unforgotten. And as the air current settles into a lullaby and your respiration slows to correspond, the structure rests with you, observant, eternal. Good night.